actually the person that owns the property, and I know it's clarifying, but Harvest Market does not own the property.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks. Amy Wynn with Wynn Crystal Planning and Biology, and I'm the agent for the Horner Bosma family. And we're calling this project Spring Pond West. As some of you know, Spring Pond Properties is the organization that owns Harvest Market? No, I can get this wrong.
No, sorry.
You said
Spring
you're
Pond
correct.
Properties is the property holding company owned by Tom Horner.
Oh, thank you. Sorry. So the big idea for, well, first of all, thank you for giving up your Saturday, and thank you everyone here for giving up your Saturday as well. We are grateful for this opportunity to have a little bit of focused time to present our thoughts and, for the other major property owner on the property to present their thoughts today and have that focus. Thank you. The big idea on this for today is that there are a lot of unknowns, and exact development isn't yet figured out on this piece of property down here on the south side of the mill site that's owned by Spring Pond. So there are a lot of different factors that come into play with what makes a project financially feasible, what can come over to the property. So what we're showing you today at the end are a couple of napkin sketch scenarios that are two of many that we've thrown around. And really the big idea is like where exactly can we have that commercial highway zoning? So start flipping some images. And is that dark enough for the audience, or do we need to lower shades just a little
Perhaps
bit?
we can close the windows just for on.
We could show.
The sunlight's going to bleed out.
Sorry, I wasn't looking at that.
Next to the windows, next to the windows.
Most people here, I think, understand and know what Harvest Market is about, which is healthy living and food and local produce, similar to at least Stanley's market here on the coast. As you know, it's been around since 1985, and the market itself now involves the management of Jennifer and Tim Bosma. It's a certified B corporation, which means that they have a really high level of standards that they need to meet in order to maintain that corporation status. So social and environmental performance, accountability, and transparency. And what they offer, so that all balances out with what they're actually offering as a business, which is a blend of conventional, specialty, organic, domestic, international, and local products. Something that isn't to be forgotten, which we're going to verbalize some things that everybody knows, but it's just to highlight who we're thinking about bringing on to the property, on the mill site property. This isn't just a market. This is a market that has supreme value in giving back to the community. Supreme value in giving back to the community. Literally taking every opportunity they can to do so. Here's the crew that runs the business, and we've got just Vicki in there for fun because this was a drawing for a car. That's Tom on the left, Jen and Tim Bosma sitting next to Vicki. And then this is the family. So it's a family-run business, but the family extends to basically to the employees. I don't know about you guys, but when I start thinking about the people in that building, I feel like I know almost all the names in there. I could just start rattling off names, and, it's like, and I'm not going to do it because we do it for 5 minutes. And then I'm just shocked, like for the 19 years that I've been coming here to the coast and living here, they've all been there taking care of me as well. I know who's retired, I know what they, like, Chris digs ditches for fun. I mean, how weird is that, Their family is our family too. We all take care of each other. So, visual of what we know they sell, locally sourced goods and products. They're proud of their community. They do everything they can to support their community. For B Corp, and I think actually the solar panels predate the B Corp effort. It's kind of the most visible illustration of their environmental consciousness. Those solar panels and their backup batteries and generators are what help this market stay open when the power goes out. The lights are on, we're serving coffee. We have a warm place to go to, which after a couple days after the power's gone is kind of a really nice thing. In with their B Corp, we also have some pretty serious waste reduction measures that they've put in. They've been at near net zero. No issue with finding a good wax cardboard recycler at the moment, but if anybody has any suggestions, just please let me know. When the recession came, they had started offering 10% days. The recession eased off, they're still doing the 10% days. They're smart business people because they know what's needed in order to keep the business itself financially sustainable while taking care of the community and being able to give back in things like this. I was just telling Jen the other day, it's like, I know you see we can order case goods and pick them up at 10% day, but I always feel guilty about doing that. Like, I don't want to take advantage of you guys. And she goes, oh, no. Don't. Can I say this? she said, don't worry, because if you order a case good for picking up on the 10% day, we don't take our staff time to go put it out on the shelf and tag it and do all those things that we normally do. It goes in the back with your name on it. We just wait for you to come in. I'm like, oh, well, maybe I'm going to start doing that now. I have a few items in mind. Thank you for that, you guys. Of course, we see them at festivals and events all the time. In the past 5 years, sponsorships and donations bring local organizations approximately $2 million, and that's excluding food bank and bag token service. Including. All right, sorry. Sorry about that. $2 million, including food bank and bag token programs. Sponsorship includes sponsoring Little League teams, advertising sponsorship in festivals and events. So that's not just advertising, but when they're at the big marquee, that ends up being a bunch of financial assistance to these events, and then as well as donation efforts, which is what you're visually seeing here. For the bag token program, they don't have to give that dime to the community. They could just take that 10 cents that people pay to buy a bag from them.
I'm going to stop you.
You're going to stop me? Okay.
I'm going to stop you. Originally, we were giving out the bag token for people who were buying bags. And what we noticed was that was defeating the purpose of the 10-cent fee for the bag. It was to reduce the amount of paper bags that were being used. And so we started giving out the bag token only for people bringing in their own bags. So we could see more people using what they already have instead of buying more and more paper bags. You're welcome.
We're going to do that again. Okay. So that dollar amount in over the course of the last 6 years is $300,000 in direct cash donations to these different organizations. So that's the Mendocino Coast Children's Fund, Parents Clubs and PTAs, Redwood Coast Senior Center, Fort Bragg Food Bank, and News. And then food donations to the bank. This one donation in this image, that's 700 pounds just in that one donation. So for this property, the property boundary extends just between that, I don't have a pointer, but just between that, it's the asphalt area is the western side of the asphalt area, excluding that white square, is the property line on the west side. And that goes north pretty much all the way to the riparian area at the very north end at Hazel Street, thanks. There's a cypress windrow in the middle of this image. It's pretty dark, but it goes east-west with a little bit of north-south on the west side. That's actually the north-south part is on the Georgia Pacific side. And what's south of that cypress windrow is the nursery and the pad upon which the greenhouses used to sit. And those greenhouses and the outdoor nursery, that's where they grew their starts and then finished them out outside for planting out in the forest. I believe this was one of the, if not the earliest, one of the earliest nursery programs. Here's a little close up. You can see the asphalt and those the trippers on the asphalt. So when you walk across there, you really need to make sure you keep your feet up, or else the berry vines will kind of grab you. You can see to the left, well, you can see at the very top end of the image, beyond the cypress row, that's the riparian area, the riparian wetland and the Bishop Pine Forest is up there. The Bishop Pine Forest comes a little bit south out of the riparian wetland area, but the kind of north-south sense of the property really, the line between those two is the cypress windrow. Everything south of the cypress windrow is basically a culturally managed site. That's where the nursery was. And you've got this row of invasive species of Chinese privet. I don't really know why that was put there, but those are shrubs on the west side. And then you start getting into a little row of cypress trees that are those short little guys. The other tall stuff between the windrow and the asphalt is mixed conifers. So you've got Monterey cypress, Monterey pine, you've got a few bishop pines, maybe like a dozen. And then south of that, so on the east side of that asphalt there is more redwood. And the redwood, as you probably, many of you know, isn't really acclimated to being the first line against the ocean spray. So they're starting to get, now that the buildings are gone, they're starting to get a little bit of salt spray. This is the riparian and wetland area to the north side, with at the south, you may be able to see the distinction of where the Bishop Pine Forest begins, and then the windrow is that tall group in the back. And this obviously, hopefully obviously, is no question this portion of the property will not be developed. There are some issues with encampments that occur in here and some trash, some invasive species, so there's opportunity for improvement here. So if there's ever any significant vegetation management or removal on the south end, there's certainly an opportunity to improve on this end. These are two of the many scenarios that we've kind of sketched back and forth, and you will see a beautiful presentation later with a different property owner and set of designers. These are not trying to be on that level of presentation. These are just, color blocking, trying to figure out what kind of development could come out here with the market, which is the big red block, to be able to help fund getting the market out there, because it would be quite an expensive endeavor to develop this vacant parcel, and just the market itself isn't enough to pencil it out. So there's a couple of scenarios illustrated here, and we have, and then we'll have to try to figure out how parking might be able to fit in there as well. I think, as many of you know, when Tom bought this property, it was communicated to him with him and his realtor, with their due diligence, that the area of the windrow south could be utilized for commercial development. So that was the expectation when it was purchased, and so that's why you've seen, and then with the commercial line going back and forth over the last couple of years in the land use plans, that's why there's been this expectation that the market development with auxiliary development could use that area. So the scenario on the left is pretty pretty simple. The market in one part of the property, and then the south part of the property would be housing. So apartments, and, mostly apartments were maybe 800 to 1,200 square feet, or 800 to 1,400 square feet. And that's about 2 acres on the south end, so that would be about 48 units. And then the hatch blocks that are outside of the property are just holding, they're just placeholders for where we have to get the parking on the property. So we know that if we were able to utilize the southern 7 acres of the property, which is what this would be utilizing, that we would need this amount of development footprint, and then somehow figure out how that parking would fit in there as well, and circulation and everything else. So it's very tight. On the right-hand side is a different scenario where we have just a suggestion of residential with the 2 orange outline areas, and then some additional small businesses that could potentially relate to the market in a healthy living, healthy lifestyle scenario, and going for some additional multi-story. So in both cases for the residential, it would be multi-story in order to get that kind of density. The southern scenario, I think, is the 5-acre scenario. And this last image here is 2 different zoning shapes that would accommodate these 2 different scenarios. And you might wonder, on the right-hand side, if the market were to fit into the asphalt area of the greenhouses, why the zoning would scoot up. The zoning in that scenario would scoot up to be able to utilize the privet, the Chinese privet area, which is an invasive species, and use that for employee parking and have some room around the back for servicing. And it's Jennifer's reminding me, this scenario, I think neither of these scenarios, is that true? Do you really give you enough parking? I don't know how many parking these days.
We've outgrown the parking lot at the Boatyard Shopping Center, and we need more parking to be able to have our customers and customers of other businesses that we would need there.
So with this, we would like for you to consider leaving the door open for one of these scenarios for commercial highway zoning on the property. And there are a lot of other unknowns, not just the zoning on this property. There are just other unknowns that in the Spring Pond world that prevents us from being able to give you a more clear image of what might be able to happen out there, because there isn't a clear image at this moment. There are too many moving pieces. But what we do understand is that this property is an opportunity to be a gateway into the city. That this family-run company, from my perspective, would be a really fantastic business to have there, because if they move out there, we know the kind of development that they would bring with them, auxiliary development to the residential, auxiliary development to the market, would also have the same philosophy of healthy living and community support. So with that, we would like for your consideration, just let me know what slides you want us to land on.
Okay, does the council have any questions on this? Any questions on the council?
I always have questions. Just back to the vegetation plan. I've walked through there several times, and it seems mostly younger trees. Do you have any feeling for how much of that is natural versus planted?
Yeah, on the north of the windrow, we believe it's almost all natural. It's remnant Bishop Pine Forest. We know that this portion of the coast was Bishop Pine Forest before the Europeans developed it. there is kind of straddling the hedgerow along the highway to the north and south is a big stand of eucalyptus trees. And then as the vegetation comes to the south, it is truly a hodgepodge. You have a great many Monterey pines that I would say is, with the redwoods, those are the predominant species in that portion of the forest. There are a number of Monterey cypresses. There are a few dead firs. Some of those Monterey cypress, some of the Monterey cypresses are really kind of starting to do some pretty, there's one big, major Monterey cypress
They seem to be pretty
really
delicate.
starting to lean. And in the next week or two, Spring Pine will be submitting an application for vegetation removal of 5 hazardous trees that have the potential to fall into the road. And there's an emergency permit for removing of those is begun as well. Basically, there's about 19 years of deferred maintenance on this property that on this south of the hedgerow portion had been a human maintained.
And so all those cypresses that were planted on that row were all planted, right?
Yeah.
Right,
Because
they're
that
not-
was a windrow for the nursery.
That's what I
the
thought.
outdoor
And then my final one was, Harvest Market is like a secret to any tourist that comes into town. They can't figure out that you're up on the hill and, I'm just wondering, is this gonna be the same kind of thing, or how do you plan to become visible?
Well, with the highway right there and people driving by, they should see, with the highway being right there, people should be able to see us right there. We're up on a hill and people are getting into town and they come over Highway 20 and you get to that end, that signal light, and a lot of people feel relief because they're off that windy, scary road. And they're not looking around at what's around them yet. And so being on that highway will give us that visibility.
Okay.
Have you started a botanical study, scientific study, arbor study for that property? Has that started?
Our botanical study is done.
It's done.
Is done. Yes, we are just finalizing it and it will be final.
Okay.
Yeah, and on this map, you can see at the north end, 2 different kinds of buffers. The yellow buffer is the buffer so we've done our environmentally sensitive habitat area survey. So that, I think, was about 81 hours of surveying. It might have been more than that, but it's the number that sticks into my mind. We had 3 different biologists from our office working on that. So Bishop Pine Forest is probably the buffer that, the southernmost Isha in that portion, environmentally sensitive habitat area in that portion of the property. And that kind of acts as a buffer to the wetland and riparian area that's just to the north that you'll see here. So the wetland and riparian area is a little bit further. You'll see a relatively circular white buffer to the upper right-hand corner of this image, and that is proactive buffering of a raptor nest that when we did our bird of bat survey, we've seen red-tailed hawk, not shoulder, red-tailed hawk, but just one going to that nest, not a pair. So we're buffering that nest. It's in the eucalyptus trees, and we're buffering that nest, assuming occupation, but depending on what kind of activity may or may not, might be proposed in that area. We don't have any proposal besides the removal of 5 trees. They're all further away from all of these. But if anything would be proposed within alien species breeding season, then that would require those preventative surveys. Avoidance surveys. Yeah.
In addition to the 5 trees, we are filing a coastal development permit since there's not a definition of major veg removal to remove fire fuel and ladders, limb up the trees, remove the brush underneath, and that kind of stuff.
Any questions from the commission?
How many units were proposed in the second, how many housing units were proposed for the second option?
The second one is probably, and that was much more conceptual than the first one, but that's probably just maybe 15 or 20 units. The first scenario is really the scenario when we started doing some very, very rough crunching of numbers to figure out what might be able to facilitate bringing the market over to this piece of property. And we realized that we would have to, in order to pay for that, we would actually need to have a fair amount of something that's readily marketable, and that would be some housing and a fair amount of housing. And that helps. It's not gonna pay for the market to be developed, but it helps pay for the down payment to get the loan.
These would all just be apartments that were rentable, market rate apartments.
They would be, I don't, yeah, there's not a firm plan at this moment, but there's definitely a desire to have a range.
How many square feet do you currently have, and then how, plus or minus, how many is represented in your red boxes up there?
It's equal. We have 40,000 square feet on the rate.
Is that footprint, or is that on 2 stories, or is that?
For the market, that's
That's what.
footprint, yeah. And so this square, these shapes, the square shape to the right was taken directly from an overlay over the existing harvest market we just brought out. Yeah.
You already said this, but can you remind me, what was the number of units you were spitballing for the first scenario?
Spitballing, the southern 2 acres of the property, which with the current high density zoning that would be allowed within commercial highway is 24 units an acre, so that would be 48 units. Spitball.
How many other commercial locations are you considering, places out there besides the main store? Are you envisioning other commercial properties to rent there?
If we can, yes. There are at least 7 other people who have approached us that want to join us. Some coming from other areas, some from Fort Bragg, and we'd like to attract new businesses as well.
But those, it's kind of the limitation is lot size, parking, and how will those facilitate having, getting the market built.
Have you run into any challenges with FAR as you're looking at that? The flora area ratio?
We haven't explored punching beyond that, but if FAR comes into play for wiggle room, we could definitely explore that with design professionals.
Everything worked in your favor. What timeline are you looking to start constructing a new store?
I don't see it happening in less than 2 years.
Less than 2 years. Okay.
No, his Tom's statement was, I don't see it happening in less than 2 years. So
Okay.
it'd be 2 years or more.
That'd be the earliest.
Okay.
I'm pragmatic about the process.
Good. What's the total acreage that Spring Pond purchased there?
It's 15 total acres.
15. And then the riparian area and the forest is about approximately how many
About
acres?
7.5.
7.5.
Well, the riparian area down to the edge of its buffer is 7.5,
Which would remain untouched,
which would remain untouched,
undeveloped.
undeveloped. And we could improve it as well. There's a lot of improvements that can be made out of it.
Yeah, and meaning habitat improvement, yeah. There's different definitions of that. Sorry.
Any other questions from the commission?
Would access be from Highway 1? to the development? Would there only be one access point?
At this point, we haven't explored if we can access off Highway 1. Right now, it would be off the Cypress Road extension.
So all of the businesses would be served with your intention off Cypress? That would be from the signal?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would like to add that access, I think, is something that would definitely have to be figured out once a circulation plan starts coming into play and development comes into play. From my previous projects, I would be surprised if the only access would be, if the only functional access for the property would be on Cypress. I would suspect that a designer would say they would want at least one access on Main Street. Whether that's permissible or not, I don't know.
In this parking scenario, these black squares are the area of parking that you need, not where you're planning to put the parking.
Thank you, yes. Yeah, we kind of have GIS and then Adobe editing and don't have that skill level in our office to quickly draw up a whole bunch of scenarios where we can fit things in properly. So thank you for your graciousness in recognizing that these are just placeholders of areas and the parking will be on site.
And that area, right, is, no.
Oh, this area is parking plus aisles. Originally, we had smaller squares because we just didn't really figure it out. Sorry.
I just have one more question about the apartments. And this is probably none of our business because it would belong to you. I'm curious, is your plan for the apartments, whichever plan you choose, for your employees is first priority, or is it temporary housing for everybody, or do you have a plan?
I would want some of it as workforce housing, and so that we have places for our employees to live. Yeah.
Okay.
It's just one of the things we
Yeah,
do around.
one of the million scenarios that we're throwing around, but with scenario A, with the development pretty much being the market and housing, hopefully a little, kind of maybe a little bit of auxiliary services as well. But the housing on the south end would be more typical market rate apartments and or townhomes from 800 square feet to 12 or 1,400 square feet. Possibly a crazy idea, but and those on the south end would be available for sale. That would help facilitate the market being built. On the market, on the second floor, with some really good soundproofing, workforce housing on that whole second floor. That would be efficiency units and smaller, and that would be retained ownership by Harvest Market, so that they could make sure that there's always a place for their employees at least to land first. And then, once they're there and are, economically stable to move somewhere else, they can do that. So we figured they'd be the ones that would be most willing to live on top of a market and with the noise, but we know there's ways to address noise.
Okay, any other questions on the presentation? Okay, we'll open for public comment on this presentation only. So if you have any comments, we've asked the presenters to jot down any answers to questions you may have, which will be addressed after public comment. So if there's any public comment on this presentation, please come up to the podium. And we allow up to 5 minutes.
My name is Jerry Stavely. I live on Harold Street here in the city, and I have 3 questions about this proposal. One is, let's see, the first one is, I think it's important for you all, both the Planning Commission and the Council, to consider what is going to happen to the old property if this new marketplace is developed. That means there's going to be quite a bit of asphalt. You're trading area that was originally developed for urban renewal, so it's part of the urban site of Fort Bragg. And you have quite a bit of asphalt that is there right now, and so in essence, one thing you would be doing would be trading all that this partially green area on the mill site for the asphalt that would be presumably sold. And I've forgotten what I wanted to say. So anyway, keep that in mind. And the other main thing I wanted to say is that this seems to be an example of what the consortium people have been warning about, which is that the buyers are proposing to you how the land should be used. And I think it's important for you all to develop your comprehensive plan for the whole mill site before you start giving what the new owners are proposing that they want. I think it's important for the city to impose as much as it can what is best for the future of the whole community. So, and to do that, I think a comprehensive plan that takes in all the factors of future use of the mill site should be developed before you start making zoning plans. That's all.
Anyone else? Comments, questions on that presentation?
Can I have one? I
Yeah, you
saw
can
my
use
notes.
up to 5 minutes.
I just had one other comment, and the other thing I'd like you to consider is the view shed. That's an old term that the people used to consider, but if you're going to have a second-story market there, that may change what the public sees as they come into and out of town. I'm not saying it's good or bad, it's just something to consider.
Hi, Leslie Kashiwara. I was very graciously allowed to tour the property on Thursday. It was really wonderful to see the forest from the inside. I have to agree with Amy's assessment of the assemblage of trees that are there, and that probably from the windrow cypress going north is natural, and the last stand of northern bishop pine, what used to be populate most of the headlands, so that's a very important habitat. It is important to consider the different scenarios and what that might mean, and also what property improvement might mean. Habitat improvement can be interpreted in many different ways depending on who's owning the property and what they want to do with it. From turning something from a natural wild habitat into more of a parkland, and that would still be open space, so it's important to think about what that might look like. I did hear from the property owner that they were told that the forest to the south of the windrow did not need to be retained, and that was told to them by a city staffer in error, because that's not what the city council has said. I don't know how you rectify that. I don't know how you provide guidance to a property owner who clearly wants to build something that's a benefit that people want. One of the proposals that was put forward was to try to do a land swap where they could get more acreage to the west towards Jermello Way, and that property is owned by GP. But if that situation changes, perhaps something like that might be possible, because it would be wonderful to see that open area developed in a way that would be a benefit to the community. am concerned about the forest in terms of death by 1,000 cuts. And the bird that was seen actually is a red-shouldered hawk. I know you were trying to think of the name of it, I know, read this and read that. And those are, and people have seen breeding pairs there, and they do reuse their nest year after year. They do hunt in the edge of the riparian area, and they're monogamous, they mate for life. And I don't know where their nest is. And so that would be an important thing to determine.
Okay. Anyone else?
My name is Mark Jensen, and
You speak in the microphone.
sorry. My name is Mark Jensen. My wife and I moved up here about 5 years ago, and in big part because of Harvest Market, because we thought it was a great asset for us to move up here. But when you come into town, I have to say it's frankly a bit of an embarrassment because it really looks ugly. And it seems like getting Harvest Market here is a good step in the direction of really improving the appearance and also decreasing the amount of travel that the local residents of Fort Bragg have to do to get their food and whatnot. So I would heartily support putting a market here. It would be a great asset to the community.
Hi, my name is Bernadette Rappin, and I was born and raised here in Fort Bragg. I'm a native Pomo Indian here, and I was wondering if you guys are gonna tear out those wetland trees and everything. No? Okay. And I'm just asking you guys, please don't disturb that. You know, you guys, because there's bad juju in there, and I was always told, because I live down on the hillside, and I was always told by my great-grandparent, do not play in there. There's bad juju there, and there's animals. I hear them at nighttime howling, and, you know, the birds and everything. So I was just wondering, you know, it's a great thing, but we want to bring this town bigger for everybody else, because, you know, there's nothing here anymore. So we need housing, new stuff here, and I'm glad. I just wanted to know if you guys were going to touch that. That was all. Thank you.
Anyone else? Did you want to answer any questions or clarify any statements that were made? Oh, we still have one. Please come on.
My name's Bruce Moore, and I live south of the city of Fort Bragg by about a mile and a half, about 4,000 meters, maybe from the old mill ponds. And I'm curious if the city council is going to entertain and accept written comments on this proposal after today, rather than just spoken, since this is the first public presentation by Tom Horner.
Yes, we definitely always welcome written comments, and you can address each member of the council and the planning commission, and it would go to our city clerk. And we appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Just realizing that I watch these videos and you can't always see somebody shaking their head in the background. To answer Bernadette's question on the record, there is no expectation of development in the wetland and riparian area where that region is. Thank you, Leslie, for red shouldered. I knew it. I'm dyslexic. I knew I was going to get that. I think that's pretty much it. We really appreciate everybody's comment. I don't think we have any problem with hearing people's comments from this point forward. You know, the formality of how you guys accept comments is different, potentially different. Yeah, that's probably all I'm going to say right now. But if there's something that I missed addressing, but I think from their comments, if you responded to the ones that needed clarification, let me know if I've missed something.
Amy, would you welcome members of the public contacting you with clarifying questions, how would they do that if they wanted to
Yes.
reach out to you? Is that okay?
Yes, anybody from the public is welcome to reach out to me if they're hesitant to reach out to the property owners directly. I know that happens often with projects. And our company is Wind Coastal Planning and Biology. We're a couple blocks north of here on Main Street. You can access us through our website. All of our contact information is there as well.
What's the name of the company?
Oh, Wind Coastal Planning and Biology.
W-I-N-N.
Thank you, W-I-N-N. Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks.
And if you want to ask us any questions, you can reach me at jennifer@harvestmarket.com.
Or just while we're shopping, right, we can ask you.
Come find me.
I see you at lunchtime. We may have some clarifying questions or comments from the commission.
I was just going to say, as you're walking out the door, Jennifer's going to bring her daughter to Davis, my alma mater, so good luck, go Bags.
Any follow-up comments, questions from the council? Staff? Great then. Point of order, did you have a certain order of the next presenter?
I think they assumed that it would be the skunk train folks.
Okay. Skunk train. Come on down. Yeah, let's take a quick break so we can cue up the presentation and everybody needs a quick break, 5 minutes. We'll reconvene this meeting, the joint meeting of the City Council of Fort Bragg and the Planning Commission. Welcome back, everybody. Now we're going to receive a presentation from the skunk train property owners.
Good morning.
And I'm sure to use the microphone and keep it as close to your mouth as possible so that folks at home, not just you, some of the public, make sure you keep the microphone very close so that we can all hear you and the people at home can hear you. In radio, they tell you to keep the mic, so it has to be right there.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning. Mike Hart, California Western Railroad, skunk train. We're going to make a presentation today for you, talking about overall vision we've been working on for the acreage that we picked up from the Georgia Pacific a few months ago. Before we really get into our presentation, I thought it would be useful if Robert Pinoli gave us a really brief presentation, really quickly, just talking about the status of the site itself, what's been happening the last couple of months.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, members of the City Council, Planning Commission, and staff for being here on a Saturday and spending your day with us. So we've had the property for a little over 3 months now, and we have done extensive site cleanup on the property, removing the invasive blackberries that really were trying to take the property over. Cleaning up large piles of broken concrete, scrap metal, and our next step would be to run a sweeper, if you will, over the property to really do a final cleaning on it. Things are coming along quite nicely out there. You can actually see a lot and get a better understanding or lay of the land. We've also spent some time working on dry shed number 4. The building is in really great condition. There were a couple of issues, very small issues on the southeastern roof that needed to be addressed. And so we had, during our due diligence process, we had engineering firm come out and give us an assessment on the building and the soundness of the building, and found it to be in very, very good condition. We've also done some work on the south wall where there was some rot issues. So that's coming along quite nicely, and we expect to have that work done in the next couple of weeks. And the site, overall site cleanup of vegetation and debris piles and old lumber and what have you done as well in the next couple of weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. In addition, we've obviously had to reach out to a lot of folks to learn about the property and learn what we should be doing with it. Chris Hart can give you just a quick overview of who we've consulted with just in the last few months to actually put together this presentation.
Good morning. It's quite a task to pulling together what we've heard that the community wants, but also some plans that we think are achievable. In doing so, we've really tried to include a lot of people in this process. Frankly, we've participated, I think the number of public meetings on the subject is up to 36 as of today, and I think we've participated in all of them. In addition, many commission meetings, council meetings with the public, but there's a number of other organizations we just wanted to call out and mention to you that we've participated in this. Certainly our architect today, Hornberger and Morrison, will be making an extensive presentation. Wind Coastal Planning, the Sherwood Band of the Pomo Indians, many meetings with them. North Coast Brewing, talking about our mutual interests. The Pinnacle Advisory Group, they were involved doing a detailed housing and hotel study, and that's still in the process. We've worked with Barnett Environmental, working on the wildlife corridor study that we were asked to work on. We have involved Far Western anthropology research to make sure we look after the cultural resources that exist on the property. And they've been reviewing our plans and making sure that what we lay out overlap well. We've involved environmental attorney, Fulcrum advocates. We've also had discussions with the DTSC talking about the environmental and zoning issues and balancing those. We've involved Crane Construction on the dry shed, how to preserve that. We've done certainly a lot of survey work, and we primarily used LACO there. And frankly, just a lot of discussions with the community. And we look forward to getting more feedback today when you hear our plans. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. So briefly, we came out of that last meeting a couple of months ago, and it's like, okay, wow, you've given us sort of a zoning target about what you'd like to see happen. And we've had the last 2 months, Bert Miller and his team have now spent figuring out how to take the vision that we heard from the City Council and Planning Commission and turn that into actual plan and give you feedback about what that would end up looking like. So Bert, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Mike. Good morning, council members. Good morning, commissioners. I'm Burton Miller, a principal with architecture and planning firm Hornberger and Worstel, based in San Francisco. Very pleased to be involved in this prospect in this historic piece of property. I would like to provide a little context and in presenting this vision for the creative repurposing of what is a brownfield site. And we've worked hard, as Chris has indicated, to build upon the good work of the council, the commission, and community stakeholders. I just need to make one comment. We're having some formatting issues, so those of you familiar with the site will recognize in the images projected that they're somewhat compressed vertically, so the council and commission can refer to the booklet, which will represent things in their proper proportions. Again, reminding everyone that the existing site really is brownfield, largely covered in concrete, sort of residual from its former uses. We were fortunate to have this initial land use map that was developed through a public process. It's important to note that this is really a diagram, as Mike suggested. It's not yet a plan, but it is expressive of a number of community and city goals and objectives, notably enhancing access and open space, providing much needed residential housing opportunities across a spectrum, including workforce housing, building upon some existing assets and really using this as a point of departure in the planning process. So when we begin with a diagram, such as this, we add to it or factor in addition to the goals and objectives represented here, other goals and objectives and vision of the property owner. And they bring some added dimension to those considerations, clearly how they envision advancing this planning process. So we give careful consideration to how the site might be organized. We look at what we characterize as site fit or carrying capacity, which is exploring within the construct of this diagram just what the capacity of these individual blocks and parcels might be to bear development. We looked at the immediate context and the interfaces and transitions between the project area and the existing community. The owner is interested in a very important component of the project, an extension of the Sept train rail line to the north. We consider the market, as I think Mike and Chris indicated, there are market feasibility and financial feasibility studies being prepared for the hospitality and residential components of the project. And we also look at constraints. The most notable here, which isn't immediately apparent, is what would be the extension of Redwood Avenue is actually off-site. It's below the property line, so that the desire of the city to extend West Redwood Avenue into the mill site has to happen in a subsequent phase or as we move forward. And you'll see we've illustrated a phase one scheme that is addressing the immediate property, and a phase two, which is more a vision incorporating what might happen to the south. So here's the plan. Again, it's compressed in proportion. We'll have to work out the software issues. But this is expressive of an interpretation of the city's diagram, factoring in those issues and variables that I had mentioned. The disposition of the uses on the site is pretty consistent with that land use map, with the addition at the north of a glass beach depot and an extension of the rail. As you can see with this little pointer, we're picking up an existing rail alignment, bringing it through the site, along the coast to a turntable and North Station, which is associated with Glass Beach and that existing parking. We've added about 210 spaces of public parking to provide greater access for both the station and Glass Beach. That rail line passes through a kind of seam in the site which separates residential neighborhoods to the north from sort of a mix of uses to the south, adjacent to, that's the end of West Redwood, right there. It's a little difficult to see here, but in phase one, when that road is not extended, along the front of this sort of mixed-use zone would be a promenade, which would be of sufficient width to accommodate emergency vehicles. So in the event of fire, work with the fire marshal to make certain that they have the proper access to the site. So that would be pedestrian only, and again, of sufficient width to accommodate emergency vehicles. In order to access the site sort of by vehicle for purposes of service, from the end of the right-of-way, enter the site, and there's a kind of a, I hesitate to call it a service road because it would be integrated into the plaza, but it would provide service vehicle access to the hospitality piece out on this corner of the site. En route, there is a visitor attraction to be determined, but it would build on the history and traditions of kind of the railroad and that part of Fort Bragg's history and culture. It would incorporate a reuse of the dry shed, and there would be 100 additional parking spaces here for the public and 200 there, so 300 plus, not including street parking, purely dedicated, bookending that more public area of the project. I'll come back to this, but there's a block of higher density housing between those amenities and uses and the hospitality piece. The hotel is right now pending more market analysis and based on conversations with general managers in the region with our hospitality consultant. View it as a hotel slash condominium, meaning the hotel rooms or some percentage of them could be sold as condominiums but remain in the hotel rental pool. So their interiors would be consistent. It would look very much like a part of the hotel, but could be in private ownership. And there's sort of a mix of standard rooms and cottages. I should note that everything represented in this plan is within the 35-foot height limit, and much of it is at 2 stories. The hotel would have portions at 3 stories, but wouldn't exceed the existing height limit. Along the bluff, those cottages would be 1 story. It would be a second tier with windows, view corridors between that could be 2 stories. It's conceivable there would be some area where it might go, to 3, remains to be seen, but quite low and appropriate in scale, very low impact on the side of the coast. I'm going to come back to the residential in a little more detail. So, if I back up for one moment and reflect on the city's land use map, again, that was a pretty, rough isn't quite the word, but it was a diagram. So the calculation of developable land needed to be disciplined a bit more. So when we're talking about developable land and calculating densities, we're talking about net developable land. So that land is within the street rights-of-ways. Does not include street planting strips, sidewalks. It's the property itself as it would be described. If we take the residential blocks in the city's land use map, I calculate the site area based on presumptions of rights-of-way and actual developable land. I got about 17 acres, which is a different figure than the city's had communicated in email at some point. If we take the city's densities, medium and high, at their high-end values, 12 units per acre for medium, 15 dwelling units per acre for high, and apply that to the diagram, the city's plan at the city's densities generates 245 dwelling units. The densities of 12 and 15, while characterized as medium and high density, are actually on the low side. Medium density conventionally is 10 to 28 units per acre. High density is greater than 28. So in order to achieve, well, go back. Well, let me go through the same exercise on this. This is our proposed land use map. And again, it's quite similar to the cities, but informed by a more developed understanding of the program, the uses and their requirements. And we have actually expanded the open space. What we're representing within the property as open space is now 26 acres. We've slightly reduced the land dedicated to residential. We're at 14 and a half acres. And recognizing the need and the desire on the part of expressed by the city to achieve a more meaningful number of housing units, more diverse in type, we're proposing to add another land use designation, which we're characterizing or calling small unit high density. The 12 to 15 units per acre can yield essentially for sale single-family homes. On the higher density side, they may be townhomes, but they're essentially single-family homes. They're not workforce housing. They're not more affordable housing. It's more diverse in type. So the approach to achieving greater diversity in housing and housing that can address the needs of workforce is a technique called affordable by design, which means essentially the units are smaller. They're more affordable because they're smaller. They offer greater opportunity to enter the market because they're smaller. And they may range in size from a studio that could be as small as 450 square feet to 1 and 2 bedrooms in the 650, 850 square foot range. When you apply those unit sizes to the 2 higher density blocks that we've identified, this block in the south, which sits adjacent to parking, dry shed, hotel. And this block, which sits below the Glass Beach Depot and that parking, and bookend the residential in the middle, on 2 levels, you can achieve a density of up to 42 units per acre, which is substantially greater than 15 units per acre. What's interesting is densities are assigned to land for a couple of reasons. Generally having to do with managing high bulk and mass, and secondarily what you might call neighborhood fit or character. The presumption when you say high density is high density, big, blocky, multi-story buildings. It doesn't have to be that way. If the units are smaller, as I indicated, we can achieve much higher density within 2 stories in a high bulk and mass that's not so different than a 2-story townhome or narrow lot in single-family homes. So with that approach, we can, at two stories, get about 98 units there and about 100 there, plus or minus. These blocks, which were blocks in the city plan designated for medium and high density, remain those densities. We've reassigned some of the locations, so we've got 15 units per acre in these corner parcels, and then these 3 parcels that are addressing the open space are lower in scale, lower density. We've also simplified, I would say, sort of the pattern of streets and lessened the presence of automobiles on the site and adjacent to the open space. So we're maintaining the extension of fir and, is this a bush? I'm not sure what street that is, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Maintaining the right-of-way as a visual corridor, but leaving them as open space, small neighborhood parks. We'll see when we look at this more closely that these residential blocks, the garages and the access to the units is internal to the block. So that street and that street can be emergency vehicle access only, controlled by bollards, and be essentially sort of coastal kind of promenades that can be part of the path and public access system. So I'll quickly run through each of the program elements here. So the way these work is the area that we're talking about is defined by red, and then it's accompanied by some images that are intended to be, suggestive. Mike, do you want to?
If you want me to go through some of these things.
Sure.
Very briefly, on the, want to talk a little bit about the Glass Beach Station and some of the work that's been done. We've been working with Sherwood Band and the Pomo in our discussions about what an appropriate place for them doing some sort of a village and actually a recreation of some of the things that used to be on the site 1,000 years ago and actually show people what was there. And there's a discussion of taking the corner of the property there. but right up here at the very top corner, up next to the glass beach, of actually doing some sort of structures, doing one of their 40-foot mounds that they had had historically out there as a way of blocking the wind, but actually doing something like that where the public can actually have an access and see what actually used to be there. In addition, we did talk about doing the railroad track and turntable, and we've been talking about an unusual train station there. Actually, we're thinking along the lines of something that looks like a lighthouse, perhaps with stained glass for the glass up on top. But something really interesting and a place for the public to get up and actually see the coast from an elevated spot, probably having a restaurant there as well. But the idea is the parking there would expand. For any of you who've tried to get out to the Glass Beach parking lot, most days it's pretty impacted. The idea is that we would add another couple hundred spaces there to not only access the train, the Pomo site, as well as Glass Beach. So that's the idea up in this very northern portion of the property.
And I think in addition to what Mike described, some kind of a second level cafe, restaurant that would serve kind of the public at that end of the site, and then incorporated in sort of a lighthouse-like object would be, again, within the height limit, a sort of observation platform. And I sort of like the idea of this kind of stained glass expression of the tower. It certainly resonates with its neighbor, Glass Beach. Here's some examples of the residential densities that I was describing. So this block and that block could be at that scale. To achieve those densities, they would again be small unit, internal corridor, but on 2 levels, could be quite varied in form and I think very comfortable scale. That block at 15 and that would be something more like this, which are kind of townhouses. There's an interesting example about density and scale. This image, which is a little hard for the public to see, are the cottages at Cypress. And I calculate those to be quite close to 13 to 15 units per acre, and you know how small in scale and amenable that is. These blocks that are against the open space, we're envisioning that front tier, front row of homes to be single level. This is a property in Schatz, Oregon, which is quite interesting. The front tier of homes are very low profile, so very low impact, looking back from the coast. Sort of flat, dark roofs or flatter, dark roofs. And the units behind, in the second tier, are 2-story with a living space on the second level. So all of those homes have desirable sort of views looking over the open space toward the water. Within that 12 to 15 unit per acre range, there's a pretty broad typology of housing types that can be accommodated. So these are illustrative, but this generates 300 units of housing, which is 50 more than the city's plan, and it provides a greater diversity of housing types. And this is, you can refer to it in the booklet, but it's an expression of what I was describing, land area by block, assigned density, and number of units. We don't know quite what the city's expectation is and what sort of your impressions of densities or thresholds might be, but I'll just note that if these two blocks that we're describing as a new land use designation, small unit, high density, if that was for some reason too great a reach, and these were zoned at the city's existing CBD density of 30 units per acre, you'd lose about 50 units of housing, so you're in that 250 range. This plan could achieve more than 300 if we went to 3 stories in some limited areas. So I think there's quite a good measure of flexibility. Sure.
And I just want to add, one of the things that I've heard, and this is also for the public's sake, we've been told many times that one of the biggest needs for the city is housing. And so if some of these numbers sound like too much to many people, it's because that's what we were told the city desperately needed. And so we've tried to meet that need. And if there's a desire for less housing, we can certainly back off and modify that. But that's what we're trying to respond to in all of this approach.
I mean, just to follow on that, in our experience, for that number of units to have that range of opportunity, it makes that housing far more available and viable to many more sectors in the housing market, whereas the other densities, again, bring you back pretty much to for sale, single family. And this is sort of a little more detail, but you can see these densities a little more carefully. But I would argue these are all pretty low impact, pretty low density. It's just that, again, by unit size, you can achieve a greater number of units. And you can see here at this scale, there are no driveways or garages on this sort of project street or on the side of the open space. These blocks are accessed from that existing alley, the adjacent half block. And these 3 have one point of access from this sort of landscape street, and all the garages and services are internal, sort of out of sight, so that the frontages of all of these addressing the open space can be the native landscape, which can blend pretty seamlessly with the open space, and providing multiple points of access as well. This is the hospitality site. This precinct is pretty low density, quite open. These cottages build on some other project experience our firm has. This is a little hard to see again. This is the Hotel Del Coronado, and so we designed these beach cottages. This was also a coastal commission jurisdiction, and those cottages are against public open space. There's public rights of way between them and the water, and they vary from 1 and 2 story in the front to 3 in the back. What we're showing here is actually a greater sort of separation. We've got a little more site to deal with. This hotel would have amenities available to the community. it would have ocean view, restaurant, lounge, might have some kind of a coastal fronting pavilion that could be used for, gatherings and weddings, receptions, those sorts of things. We understand from the preliminarily from the hospitality consultant, again, after conferring with the competitive set in the Fort Bragg region, that there's just not a lot of demand for meeting space. For group business, which you depend on, if you have any amount of meeting space, the location is challenging. People apparently don't feel comfortable on the coastal roads and the winding path to get to Fort Bragg. So we would tailor the amount of meeting space to the demand, and as a rule of thumb, about 20 net square feet of meeting space per key. So you can do the math. If there are 150 keys times 20, that's how much meeting space, and it can be configured in a number of ways. There's also an opportunity for the hotel to extend its influence a little bit towards sort of Main Street here with Redwood Avenue. With demand in the future, there's ample opportunity for some additional guest rooms, if needed. But this would be, a very nicely landscaped internal environment. We're showing a symbol here for water. We need to explore that technically, but the thought is it would be nice if we could do something salt water that brings a little bit of the coast more internal to the site. This is the mixed use, quote, CBD promenade area, which has a kind of a gateway or a portal into this sort of visitor attraction. Would have some, but fairly limited ground level commercial. We're envisioning a hostel. The Coastal Commission has a requirement that you provide 20% of your hospitality guest accommodations at an affordable level. So this would be a 30-room hostel, which could accommodate, I'm guessing, 3 or 4 times that number of people, because most of those rooms are bunk rooms or quads. The hospitality consultant shared with Chris, who shared with us, some new trends in hostels that are fantastic. They're not what we think of them as, and they're actually, for the more adventurous or outdoorsy, an attractive alternative to a conventional hotel. And they provide a range of accommodation, and that also provides some resident activity kind of adjacent to that portion of the street. We're also showing the opportunity for live work or some type of residential above whatever is there at ground level. So we're carrying right now just an allowance for 10. So if you take the housing, the hotel, keys, the hostel, and the live work, you get to a nice round 500 units. This is going to take quite a bit more consideration, but the found a few images that are expressive of a sort of permeable building that has upper level terraces, that may have an arcade at the ground level, that has some sort of continuity and identity, and has the prospect similar to Main Street in Mendocino, looking out over kind of the bluffs towards the water. Now this area might want to take over here.
Of course. Thanks, Mark. By the way, don't tell Mendocino, but we really do want to steal their Main Street because it's a beautiful attraction. It's wonderful the way you're able to walk down that street and being able to see the ocean and the big open space they have there. We have the same thing right here. It's just we haven't been able to walk there for the last century. So it gives us the opportunity when Redwood does get extended, or just the promenade that we're going to do there, it gives us the opportunity to sort of bring the public out in that same kind of environment, inviting them out with trails and everything to go out into the coast. Railroad Square is an area that we actually started this whole discussion with Georgia Pacific about 13 years ago, was the idea of picking up the land between our engine house and dry shed. And so our engine house is over here, dry shed is here, and it's this area in between that we've been talking about, the idea of an outdoor amphitheater, place for the public to have outdoor events and things like that with a really nice thing. We've talked about projecting movies up against the side of the dry shed. I think it'd be great at night. So the area here, we've talked about different things that we can do. We've spent the last year in discussions with North Coast Brewing Company as far as trying to come up with some idea of beer gardens, things like this that might happen, as well as a historically themed attraction. And by historically themed, it may just be nothing more than showing the way life used to be out here a long time ago, sort of in 1885 when the skunk was founded. But the idea is to create something that brings more visitation to town. Between North Coast and the skunk, we've got a significant number of people who are interested in coming out. So the idea was to create additional parking and create a space where this could be done. And we've done a lot of extensive ideas about how this could be developed. But that's really the focus today is on zoning. And so just sort of visitors serving in this space is all we're talking about right now.
Open space. As I noted, we've increased the land dedicated to open space, and we've, I think, enhanced access and provided quite a number of routes to get to that open space and to the coastal trail. So these park-like fingers that reach back to the town, that's not dedicated as open space, but it's an equivalent pedestrian path. A little hard to see here, but we're exploring the opportunity to do a grade level separation there so that the pedestrian access could go beneath the rail. And there's a bit of a swale there and some topography, so we're thinking we can provide direct access there and not be conflicted with that rail. And then there's sort of access and extension of kind of the promenade from the hotel through from Railroad Square, from the residential neighborhoods, and from Glass Beach. So it's restoring that landscape, being authentic to what is natural there, maintaining some of these existing ponds. We haven't shown a lot of planting there. We just need to explore what's the right approach and what that should be sort of visually, ecologically, and again, more authentic to what was there. But again, today it's concrete. So we're back to this land use plan, which we hope you find addresses city goals and objectives well, that addresses many stakeholder issues and values as we understand them, and explores the opportunity of sort of land use that allows sort of more diverse housing opportunities. Where we are today. And again, it's unfortunate this is compressed, but this puts the property in a broader context of open space. So we've rendered that open space to the coastline. The parcel, which is off-site but immediately south, we very much like to see as open space with an extension of West Redwood Avenue that terminates in a gesture of arrival at the coast. Has some little short-term parking. It's connected to sort of a route kind of through the site, and would provide sort of better access, more enhanced access to the hotel. We also know there's a good deal of interest in daylighting and restoring Alder and Maple Creeks. I did a little research and found what had been proposed, and 2 or 3 different alternatives sort of merged them together for this illustration to express sort of support for and a desire to see that happen. And I guess, Mike or Chris, if anything we've overlooked, trying to provide some metrics so you can gauge what we're proposing.
Thank you very much, Bert. So what we've tried to express today is just a very first draft, so to speak, coming back to the city, saying this is what you asked for. Here we're trying to express it in a way we think we can build, and bring it back, and basically bring it back to comment. And so that's the extent of our presentation. Are there questions?
I appreciate all the work that's gone into this. I think I have to respectfully disagree that I think Blackfield just said I think I have to respectfully. Microphone, please. I'm using the mic. It doesn't appear to me to be reflective of some of the conversations we've had, at least at Planning Commission, or in some ways. Some of the things that I am concerned about when I look at it is lack of streets and infrastructure in the north, and I'm trying to picture, like, where am I supposed to park when I go visit my new friends who live in, the houses up there? Because it appears that there is no extension of Pine Fir, Bush streets, and that's something I think that we have been pretty much in agreement on in previous conversations we've had. And I also think that I'm curious about, or maybe you answered this a little bit, but Redwood Avenue, again, is not reflected as being developed. And I believe you said that's not part of your property at this point in time. The property starts just north of Redwood. Is that correct?
Yeah, the city staff had recommended that to Georgia Pacific, so we're kind of stuck with that at this point.
That's where the line is. Because again, it goes back to access to all of this, that I'm not sure, so I see 2 parking lots, but I'm not sure how easy it really is to access any of this. So that's just a concern that I have when I'm looking at this, that it looks like, again, there's no streets, there's no alleys. I do have concern about emergency vehicle access to that whole area on the north, all the residential. I used to live in that neighborhood, actually, and I'm concerned that now all the traffic will be driven down Spruce Street, which I'd be interested, I'm sorry, we don't have any traffic engineers here maybe today to speak about that. And that it also looks like, I think you've done a really good job of enhancing the views for the property, for the hotel and the residential, but I'm not sure how this, it's a little hard to visualize, but I'm not sure how this impacts the public views. Because with all the development concentrated at the north with the new depot and very dense housing up there, when you're on the coastal trail looking north, I mean, that currently is a pretty nice vista up there, and so I'm seeing lots of...
Looking north from here?
From the coastal trail, from when you're out there walking, yeah, there's a pretty good vista up there. I walk it fairly regularly. So I think those are concerns I have: streets, infrastructure, parking, and just the concentration. And again, I think we have recognized that we need more housing opportunities. That's something that's clearly been identified. So I'm just curious about if the city's identified something in the neighborhood of, 200 and something housing units. This is quite a bit more dense than, what was sort of the rationale behind that, other than making it more affordable.
Thank you. When we originally acquired the property, we were told by staff to expect 600 to 800 residential units, and we couldn't figure out how to get there. I mean, we just can't. Unless people want us to go straight up, I don't see it happening. And so we've been working with city staff, and that was the direction that we received. So we simply took the blocks which had come back in the last planning session, and we've tried to add 50 more spaces in the same footprint, but don't want them to take them right off.
I'm curious about why you didn't extend the streets. Why is it timing first?
Of course. And so one of the reasons why the streets aren't extended as much, we're really trying to minimize the impact of cars on this site. This is a big open space site, and having a bunch of cars blasting up and down the street really doesn't help anybody. We have on-street parking available all the way through here. In addition, off-street parking available in each of these areas, but we're trying to keep the cars out of sight. We don't want the view for people that are walking up the coastal trail to be a bunch of cars parked along the side of the road. So the idea is to try to pull them back and put them out of sight as much as possible. So cars are fine, we just don't want to see them.
I guess the other thing is, we've talked a lot about the wildlife corridor, and it's a little hard to tell per scale. I think the last conversation we had about it was something in the neighborhood of 200 feet. So I'm curious about how far it is from the coastal trail to the hotel development.
Sure. A couple of things. One, we had a biologist come out here and with a specific instruction to consider wildlife corridor. He then said, well, it sort of looks like you're running into a concentration camp for animals as soon as you get south of Redwood, because it's just a whole tangle of fences, blockades, concrete, and things like that that are off our site. But then as you get to the other side of the ponds, there's no wildlife corridor, you can't get anywhere. So the question was, what is a reasonable setback? How far should we come back? And the biologist's feedback was that in addition to the area that the city already has, we didn't even begin our line until 100 feet back from the property line, and then set the buildings back even further from that. So as you can see, it represents a fairly huge corridor for whatever animals want to make it as far as here, but I don't know where they go after that.
Okay, I actually see animals up there regularly.
I'm sorry?
I said I see animals up there regularly.
Oh, no, there are animals there. That's not the question. The question is, how do they get further south because of the city property further below? There are significant bottlenecks to any kind of an animal corridor. They can get through here just fine. It's what happens after that is the question. So on this property, big corridor, we're set. But it's what happens the rest of the way is the question.
I guess sort of my final comment for now. I'm curious to hear from everyone else and from the public. Certainly, it just doesn't appear to be reflective of the character of a city at this point. I know there's a lot of things about our city we all want to improve. But it looks very different to me than the current city, and I think our current policies provide that new development will be in keeping with the character of the city, small town feeling. So that's a comment.
I'm happy with the emphasis on cars. I think that's a really good thing. I'm curious, how much, I know that this is probably pretty difficult to gauge, but how much would one of these units cost in the various density zones for a person to purchase a house?
Sure.
For a unit?
One of the things that we've been doing is we've had an economist going out and actually trying to evaluate whether or not these things are even buildable in the current market. Because the problem is, there's the price of what real estate is worth currently in Fort Bragg, and there's the current cost of $300 and $400 per foot to build right now in the local market, mostly because of the reconstruction efforts that are going on the other side. So it's tough to figure out at what price these things are actually going to work. The hotel, as a straight hotel, isn't going to work. We already had that feedback. You could not build a hotel for the current cost of construction based on the current occupancy rates at all. As far as the residential units, it's really going to be driven very largely by the cost of construction. Right now, the numbers are just crazy. It might be best to create a construction project if there is a recession. It'd be a great time to do construction, because right now it's not terribly affordable. I don't have that. But there is an economic analysis which we'll share as soon as we have it finished.
Oh, okay, so
It's
at
ongoing.
this point, you don't have a feasibility study?
They've given us feedback, and basically the things that we were told was, one, that doing just simply a hotel to a big giant Ramada, I don't know, whatever, some big hotel out there, it isn't gonna work. That just the economics don't support it currently. So the idea was doing it as a condo where people could buy spaces as well as rent. And so that actually does work economically. And then as far as the residential area, at the higher density, we're trying to make things affordable there by making them even smaller. But again, it's going to be informed more by the economic analysis that we're getting finalized.
Councilmember Borsell.
I have to say I have a slightly different reaction to it. I see a lot of points where I really feel like you have been paying attention, and I really appreciate that. So thank you for the attention to detail on a lot of points here. Namely, things like added parking close to our current downtown. I see 100 spaces added there. The promenade along Redwood. My first reaction in seeing that you weren't expanding the infrastructure, including, showing the street going all the way to the ocean, which my understanding was that your group was going to be doing that. My first reaction was pretty negative, and as I'm looking at this, I really see an emphasis on a de-emphasis of cars, essentially, and starting with a focus on walking right there, I think actually will be a service to our downtown, and being able to take a beat before adding that added infrastructure to really see if it's needed, I think actually did serve us well. I have to say, I like the idea of your small unit high density proposal. And I'm curious, you have it sandwiching the housing, the bottom and the top. And to me, it's kind of having it, I love the one at the bottom because it's close to services and that makes a lot of sense as far as walking and the walkability of the town. Can you tell me a little bit about why you sandwiched? Because then the section at the north, you have that high density, but then they're not as close to services. So as far as looking at it as a walking zone, is there a rationale for why that would be up there?
Yeah, I think it has to do more with adjacent land uses and the prospect of how they might redevelop over time. The site immediately to the east is light industrial. I think it's still timber use. And it just seems like better adjacent to those uses than on the open space, for example. It could equally be on the two blocks, in the two corners below. Those are shown right now as two-story townhomes. That could be, slightly higher density, or there could be an alternative sort of distribution. But I guess the other thing, the other reality is we sort of added that upper piece of housing when we just couldn't get to a convincing number of units. And that was, the city's plan took housing sort of all the way to the existing parking lot, so it was already recognized as an appropriate, location. So, I think it's a good fit, and it's appropriate to the neighborhood, I think.
Along that note, and I do share, I am a little concerned about the medium residential actually, as far as, or actually maybe it's more the high density with the townhouses. And to Commissioner Roberts' point about staying within the characteristic of Fort Bragg and being concerned about having the look of kind of a suburbia in the middle of town a little bit. Do you feel confident that we can, in being able to design into that, I guess, that type of housing within the character of our town?
It's a good question. I'll sort of hedge this a little bit by saying that these are illustrative, and as I mentioned, there are other typologies. Interestingly, you associated townhomes with suburbia, and their origin is urban, right? So I think they can be executed in a number of different ways. They can be organized in a number of different ways. Here, because townhomes are narrow, and if you're going to sell them, it's nice to be able to park your car on the ground level. We put all the garages in the back, so you don't get a wall of garages and curb cuts, on what you like to be a pleasant pedestrian street. But, as Mike indicated, we don't have the housing analysis done, so I think we'd be completely open to exploring alternative housing types within those general density, parameters. And we want to do that anyway to test the market, but think of this as a, sort of a snapshot. It's 2 months of work, listening as closely as we've been able, Mike and Chris and that team, communicating everything, they've heard and know, and I'm sort of inclined, what I would characterize as sort of best practices and how, I put it together. Let me just answer one question on infrastructure, because you both mentioned it. For any plan like this, we have to spend some time with the fire marshal and really explore what their requirements are. We do this all the time. I've done it in hundreds of jurisdictions. You can usually find a way to reduce the amount of pavement and the amount of road if you've got the right open space network, pedestrian, bicycle, trail, and you absolutely have to provide the right levels of access for emergency vehicle service, guests, coming to visit. So we don't have all that 100% figured out, but we took some cues from Mike in the coastal environment, and it's true. We just don't want lots of vehicular circulation. It's just sort of sightseeing, parking at the curb, wandering into the open space. You want to capture those visitors at the perimeter, like at Glass Beach, like at Railroad Square. Easy access from Route 1, and you get them into the site, out of their cars, onto the trails and into the open space. The two, and I know it's sort of a logical first step to say extend the grid. That's a planning precept, right? Everybody would start there. The issue I had is I'm extending the grid into what? And into 26 acres of coastal natural environment. So I don't want to do that. Need to address access and all the things that were mentioned. You know, those two, I think the way you get in, and we couldn't agree more, Redwood Avenue extension would be ideal. It's just that it's outside of our property, outside of their property. So we illustrated a vision for that. You know, that's not what the city envisioned, it's not what we envisioned, but it's a reality until that property becomes an adjunct to the project. So this is pretty limited access before that's there. More service, so it would rely much more heavily on Pine and in from the back, you know, to parking, to service, you know, to the hotel. The residential, you know, it's not that many units. It's a neighborhood. It's not a thoroughfare. Those could be auto access. The city felt it was important, or there was a compelling reason to do it. There's one other comment on the character of this development versus the character of town. That's something we have to figure out, but in my mind, that has largely to do with scale. You know, those blocks backing up on this site, that's the back side of those blocks. So that is really an alley, just like, you know, that's an alley. So we were using kind of the alley like an alley, but internalizing that. I don't know what the long-term sort of future of that is, but it's, you know, largely one-story, medium-sized lots, single-family properties. It's not exactly a clear, compelling urban fabric. It's kind of a residual edge against what was here for however many 100 years. But yes, it has to feel somehow appropriate to the community, and that's a whole another layer of consideration.
I have one more question, sorry. To the point of the wildlife corridor, I understand the challenges with the land below and whatnot. I am a little concerned with how close the hotel is, or how much it's pushing out towards the ocean there. From the property line, would you say those initial cottages are, I mean, it looked eyeballing it like it was about 150 feet. Is that a generous assumption?
Well, there's no kind of legislative setback, so we did what I characterize as a voluntary setback, again, is good practice. That light color is, that's the property line. So in here, we're about 100 feet back from the property line. The property line is about 400, 500, 600 feet from the coast, so it's a pretty substantial distance. These are one story, and there's pretty generous separation. You know, that could be expanded. Initially, we looked at it at 150 feet, but by the time you get here, you know, your setback is that, just like, oh, I'm sorry. The property line misspoke. The property line is back here. This color rendition was not to reflect the setback, but simply the territory of the hotel. So if I went,
Just to clarify too, I mean, I guess on the lower, the southwest corner is one place where we've consistently tried to move development, the zoning back so that there'd be, the development wouldn't come that close. On the southwest corner, we felt like it was pinching. So that's extending into an area that we've kind of been consistently pulling that zoning out of. So I don't know, I guess I'd like to hear you speak to that a little bit as far as why.
well, it's a big site with a lot of coast, and that's public use. It seems to have some component of the project that is more engaged with the coast rather than a truly significant, setback from it is probably a good thing. And anybody visiting that hotel has slightly, which including the public, has a little different experience. I don't think we're far off from the city's boundary for that site. I'd say I believe it's coincident, so.
It's 150 total. So in our efforts to try and, first of all, we consulted with the biologist, trying a wildlife biologist to actually take a look at it. What's appropriate here, is a wildlife corridor make sense? Because that's what we were asked. Does a wildlife corridor work here? And the answer was, well, to have a corridor, it has to go somewhere. And so he said, you can have a buffer, but the rest of this property does not have a corridor. He just said that's just not realistic here. But as far as creating a buffer, that is good practice. And so what we did is we stepped back from the city properties. You can see we put 100 feet before we even begin the landscaping for the property, and then set back another 50 beyond that. So we did put the 150, which was what we heard from the council during that last meeting. So we did exactly what we were asked to do. So that's at least what we're trying to reflect here in these drawings.
What does your biologist say about running a rail line through the wildlife corridor?
Yeah, actually that was one of the things he said, is that in his experience, railroads are actually incredibly compatible with wildlife because there aren't trains. It's not like a road where they can end up being roadkill on a daily basis. Generally, railroads are incredibly compatible with wildlife. It's new. Yeah.
And is there any buffer proposed for between the trail, coastal trail, and the rail line?
Yeah, as you can see in the drawing, hang on just a second here, we'll try to zoom in. You can see the trail is actually way over here. We've then got the property line that's set back even further, where we actually have the rail line coming along through here. And the idea is, again, the whole point of this is try to share the coast with the visitor. And that is, the way things are set up right now, people that are getting on the train actually can't see the coast at all. So we're trying to bring them out there so they can see it, bring them all the way up to all the way to the north up to Glass Beach.
But for guests along the coastal trail, will there be any buffer between their quiet ambling and the rush of the railroad?
Sure. So the issue is that we run a few trains a day, so during those times, when a train comes by, they'll hear a train. But the buffer, if we're talking about more than the natural environment that's there as far as plants and such, we could plant trees, for example. Given how difficult it's been to grow trees in this corridor, if we were able to succeed in that, you're kind of taking away from the view itself. So probably not. I think most likely we'll just simply use the distance as well as the natural buffer that's there.
We also had a discussion about, rather than a fence, we could also use a hedge. Sometimes a natural wildlife hedge can be just as effective as keeping people away from the tracks in a safe manner. Something else I want to mention about the wildlife corridor is that as I've learned through this process, and this process isn't done, the study's still been going on, so I don't want to go too far about his conclusions. But the traffic is primarily at night. We're not running trains at night. And so as I've been learning about this, he's talked about all the distances and such, but also when the animals will be using it. And that's why the railroad tracks are generally not in conflict of when the animals want to be going through that area.
I just have one takeaway from all that. And I like the plan, and, you know, it's still open for discussion, and there's a lot of manipulating, but it was great to see this visually, rather than talk about it all the time. Just the one takeaway is, there's no demand for meeting space. I mean, I have to differ. We have no, for example, no concert hall whatsoever. We have a school auditorium, which is horrible for sound. It's not designed for major productions or anything like that. The audience needs to be above the stage, for one thing. And the other one is a tiny little place, also a school district, Mendocino Performing Arts Center there is very bare bones. So there really isn't anything like that. So we don't have a concert hall or a big giant meeting space like you would get in a Marriott or something where you have 500 people. And my vision personally, and I think a lot of other people, is that this would be a destination for conferences and conventions. And that would bring a lot of money to this town. Traffic is another issue, all that, the free busing or that sort of thing could be handled later. But I would hate for you to say in an arts community that meeting space there is no.
On that, we would love to do it, and that was from the beginning, that was part of our plans. The problem is, actually one of the companies I left off the list was Halo Hospitality, and working with them, they provided me the numbers on that we did dig into that. And he showed me the numbers that there's 825 communities right now trying to get a community meeting space. Of them, 5 are being funded. He said that you're just not, everyone wants them, but they don't make sense financially. Now, we're still happy to try to make this work, and what they advised us, start small. Start with something that you can, instead of a large facility, go with a small to medium-sized facility that's good for 100 people, 200 people. Do something where you can do weddings, do events. Show that you can have sustained viability for that meeting center, and then upgrade to a larger size. But he said, grow in 2 to 3 stages, but don't come out with a major meeting center from the start, because right now the numbers aren't working.
Thank you. I have to disagree because we already have those, and I think if you build it, it'll come. If you start small, it'll just be the same as we already have. And I have to say that I participated as a driver in a conference. It was a big conference. They brought busloads of people from all over the United States here, and they put them in about 15 different venues, and they had meetings all over Fort Bragg, all over Mendocino, and that was one way to handle the conference, but there was no central place for them to meet.
So, by the way, as Chris has said, we would absolutely love to have one. We hired a consultant specifically so we could figure out how to do it, and he just said 825, 5 are being built. He says the economics rarely work, that you've got the right confluence of airports, highways, where you can fill it often enough to actually service the debt. However, if there is an organization in this area that would be willing to actually fund that as part of the site, I'd make room for it right now, without any hesitation at all. Just from a bankability standpoint, they came to us and said, start with something small. I believe the number you were using would work out to being a 3,000 to 5,000 foot space to start with in the hotel, and with the room to grow if it turns out that actually fills.
I share Commissioner Roberts' concerns about circulation. I'm sure that this is the beginning stages of this entire process, and we appreciate the work you put into it. Circulation to me is also very important, that there are a couple ways in and out of each of these areas. Because if there's a major fire in one area, there's only one exit, and of course that'll come out in your circulation and traffic study, I'm sure. Emergency services, again, you'll have to go through the fire marshal, but I am concerned about, well, the circulation of these vehicles, but also our volunteer fire department. Right now, it's adequate, and they do a great job for the size of our city, but if we're adding this much more development, I'd like you to consider fire suppression. I'm sure that most of your facilities and homes will maybe have sprinklers, but to keep in mind water catchment capabilities to be able to suppress fires out there. That's one of my main concerns. In opening statements of Councilmember Peters, who's not able to be here today, I share his concern about desalination. And the city will have to work on that as far as public facilities, parts of the property if we acquire some land on the southern portion. But for 500 units we're looking at with the hotel, the hostel, and the dwellings, that's a huge demand, and I'm sure that we've been assured that the water capacity in Fort Bragg can suffice, as well as building other parts of the property, other parts of the city east of here. I was always under the impression that there would be no single-family homes out there. However, I'm open to the higher density single units. I think that's a good idea, because those actually do fit into our housing element that we just completed, where we want to be creative and we want to offer variety for people to get into the housing market. And so having single family smaller units, I think, fits right into what our housing element is today. So I'm okay with that. I just didn't want what we talked about, McMansions out there, where somebody would go and buy 25 acres and put one home. That doesn't help us in our housing crisis. So adding, I'm not sure where 600 units came from, but that seems to be extremely, and you wouldn't be able to fit that into there. But 300, I think, is a part of our goal. We thought 200 units within the next 5 years, so hopefully you get building soon, so that you can help us meet our goal, the city council's goal of 200 units in the next 5 years. I know that's very ambitious, but we still want to keep our eye on that. So, I'm mostly concerned about emergency services and fire suppression and circulation. So I'm sure that'll come to us and come to the Planning Commission for their review and approval.
Absolutely. Those are areas that what we're showing here is our preferred vision. This is how we'd like to do it, with as few streets interfering with the open space as possible. If necessity requires us to change that because the fire marshal says that's necessary, or the circulation requirements dictate more streets, so be it. But we're really taking this on with the objective of taking off as much asphalt as possible from this site rather than putting more on.
I understand this plan does not address the brewery, but is there allowance for the expansion of the brewery at this time for that plan?
The current discussion with North Coast, as you may recall, on August of last year when we announced that we were under contract, we met with North Coast Brewing Company with the idea of actually relocating their current facilities into Dry Shed. Right now, Dry Shed is about 80,000 square feet, and their need with an expanded brewery, right now they're capped 90,000 barrels a year as far as what they can do. Under their current space is literally bursting out of the roof. It's so full and so productive. But if they need a place to grow, we had offered Dry Shed as the place to go. Probably 60,000 feet of Dry Shed would probably be appropriate for a full build-out of a brewery and expansion. I don't speak for North Coast in any way, but this, at least with the discussions that we've had, and in all of our plans, we maintain that space for North Coast to expand.
So it wouldn't make sense for them to expand on site where they are?
As you zoom in on that site and actually take a look, there are some pretty tight restrictions on their current site where they are now. Dry Shed gives them the room to expand, and that's the whole idea.
Thank you.
I just want to disclose that Assemblyman Jim Wood was here just on Wednesday, and so the city manager and I got to do a walking tour of this full property. And I have to commend you all for the amount of cleanup that has been done out there. There are mounds and mounds of debris. tons of metal out there, more asphalt than you can imagine. So you have your work cut out in the next couple of years of clearing that property. But just to walk the entire property, I got a good view of your proposal, and to actually see it helped a lot, I think.
I just have one question. I don't know if my microphone's on. It is? Okay. So how does that work when you build all these homes? I mean, you offer all these homes up, or you give it to a developer to build them? So does each person own the land under which, in which case we need to subdivide the parcels?
Yeah. As of right now, we're only trying to respond to the zoning question. As we start getting into issues of entitlement, how is this going to happen, the economics of working with developers, the subdivision and such, we're going to have to get into that at that stage. Very premature for us, but my expectation is, yeah, we'll probably have to come in with a subdivision of some sort or another, but that's way out, that's way further than where we are today. We're kind of, right now we've gone as far as we can go, and we stopped today. Because we've taken the zoning map that the city gave us and said, okay, this is what we're looking for. We've tried to respond saying, okay, we think we can do this, here's how we think we can do it. When and if you give us the go-ahead or change it or tell us what you want to do, they can then go into much more detail and start really figuring out the next step.
Yeah. Two quick questions. Is the railroad elevated? And what's the zoning designation for the dry shed?
As it sits right now, we're going back on the right-of-way for most of the way that was already there. Going out to the west, we're going back on the former raised elevation that it was on. It doesn't have to go up very high, so we're not having to build up a lot, except in the one place where we want to have a pedestrian undercrossing. If it turns out, working with the Pomo tribe, that if it turns out that's not a good place to go down, it may make more sense for us to go somewhere else and go over. But under would probably be the best arrangement. So maybe have a slight elevation there as the pedestrian undercrossing goes under. So that's in answer to the first part of the question. And on the second?
Dry shed zoning?
Dry shed, in our current zoning, we show it as, I think, light industrial is the pink. That was the city's recommended zoning. And the only thing that we did is we added that purple blot off to the right of it, which would be visitor serving. Because in light industrial, it really isn't a good mix. Light industrial is appropriate for North Coast Brewing Company and any other users that might do some sort of industrial use with dry shed, that we think that's an appropriate use, and we don't disagree with the city. We just want to make sure that there's a focus on visitor serving in the area in between, particularly if we want to have an outdoor amphitheater. It really does have to allow for that kind of use.
About the railroad, you had mentioned that you were, or the rails going on the coast, you had mentioned that you were working with the Sherwood, Alexander Pomo. Have you spoken to them about the rails out there, and can you share some of that discussion?
Sure. Since the very week we finished the purchase of the property, we scheduled our first meeting. We've had a series of meetings with them. They've given me permission to say they're supportive of the project. I think we have really hit it off. We've had very frank discussions. Our very first meeting, I think, ended up being over 4 hours of just meeting with them, talking very extensively about not just how we could get along, but also the history of the area and how, and also hypotheticals and working through a lot of things. Is there anything finalized? No. We have many more meetings to go through. Regarding the railroad, we did talk to them about that. Again, I don't want to speak for them, but so far, I think we've been okay in our discussions how we would do it. One of the key things, though, is, and this was suggested initially by staff, was that not to have our railroad dig down into the ground, but keep it a few feet above. So I think where you may have been driving at is it would be a visual obstacle. That's not our intent. Our intent would be a couple feet off the ground. Now, the exception to that would be there are some natural swales in the ground, and so there may be some places where it might be 4 feet, because railroads don't like to go up and down like a roller coaster, so we want a nice even path. But ideally, we would like to be 2 to 3 feet off the ground.
Thank you, and thank you for reaching out to so many community partners. I keep hearing about different members of the community who've been moved into the conversation, and I think that's really critical, so thank you.
I also appreciate reaching out to the Sherwood Band of Pomo Indians, because it's very important that they support all of this, not just your property, but my concern is about cultural artifacts that may be out on that property. Have you addressed that with the band, as far as if there are artifacts found, would that go into maybe a museum of some kind, or what's your plan if there are artifacts there and they're discovered?
We did discuss a variety about like the what happens and everything else, and we did just talk about what would you like to have that in a museum, and they said generally they would just like it reinserted back into the ground at a different spot. And so we've talked about how we would actually do that and where, and also the need for secrecy and discretion about how that is done. And so far, we're looking fine. And I think the process with the city of the Pomo went well for the coastal trail.
Yes.
And so I know coming into that, I was optimistic, and I'm very happy how it's gone. Talking about that process.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just wanted to add a comment with respect to the Sherwood Band of Pomo Indians. They actually have been out on the site several times, and they came out prior to us doing site cleanup where we removed vegetation and the debris and all of the junk left behind. We did consult with them and just to let them know what our intentions were and to see if they had any problem. They had absolutely no problem, and they came out on the site, I don't think it was last week, I think it was late the week before. They were over in Fort Bragg on other business, and I had sent them an email, and they said, we just so happen to be in Fort Bragg, would you mind if we came by this afternoon? So they have continued to come out and really walk the land with us and be very appreciative of the inclusive nature. In addition, prior to these illustrative drawings and maps being done, we had a draft, and they were able to share it with their full tribal council Monday night. The tribal council returned no comments and had no questions, and was very appreciative of the support and effort that we've been putting through with their TIPO officer.
Thank you for that. Vice Mayor.
Just everyone, has the Coastal Commission had a chance to look at this yet?
No, we actually haven't shared it there yet, because obviously it's the city's issue to share, not ours. But we obviously would support the city in any effort to share it with the Coastal Commission.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from the commission, council? I do have a speaker card, Mr. Jim Bragg. Would you like to come up?
Hello, my name is Jim Brett, local resident, born and raised here, and a merchant, an employer also. I've got so much I could say, but I gotta keep it short here. As to the character of Fort Bragg, I mean, back in the 1800s, we had probably 50 saloons and a bunch of brothels. In fact, there was a brothel out in Des Moines out there. But today, in reality, we really have to look at density. We continue to cut up our woodlands all over Mendocino County in 1, 5, 10, 20 acre parcels. And the cost of the environment to do that is substantial. So when we look at doing a dense project in Fort Bragg, it really makes sense. We could provide the infrastructure, the water, the sewer, the fire protection. I think we need to look at these projects very closely and see about what, that they do make sense rather than we continue to cut up our woodlands. Another problem we have is vacation homes and vacation rentals being taken up most of a lot of the properties outside of the city limits of Fort Bragg. Fort Bragg fortunately does not allow the vacation rentals in Fort Bragg, which is a good thing. It makes room for more workforce housing. And that's a real key, is workforce housing, because they've been outpriced. And there's a lot of subsidized housing, but that doesn't cover people who don't qualify because maybe they make $1,000 too much or $10,000 too much. And so we really need to look closely at what we can do with workforce housing. As to this project, I don't know if there's a way that we can limit the people who reside on the houses to be homeowners and take the homeowner exemption. So if they don't have the homeowner exemption, can we bar them from buying properties? I don't know if that's the case. I would like to see that done because I'd like to see all those houses out there owned by homeowners who live and work and reside here. As to the hotel, I think the hotel project could be very good. It will feed the downtown area. It could revitalize the whole downtown area in a big way, help the restaurants and the shops down there. I don't know what, I'm going to ask what they're looking at in the way of the way of resident or occupancy on the hotel. Can you guys tell me that?
They're gonna write down the questions and answer them after.
Okay, because if you look at some of the better run hotels, the density is high. If you look at an average of Fort Bragg, it might be 40–50%, but some of these other hotels might be running 70–80%. If you look at Little River Inn, Mendocino Hotel, they're probably closer to 90%. The same with the Beachcomber. So I think they need to take that into consideration because this would be a good project. As to the condos, I would rather see a residence hotel where people can come up, like our traveling nurses, or people who are coming up for state or government agencies to work for 2 or 3 weeks or something like that with internet and kitchens. I'd rather see that on that property than condos. But anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you. We have a speaker card, Mr. Gallo, John Gallo.
Did we have a chance to put that on there? Yes. Great. Okay, great. I had some slides too. Okay, wonderful. My name is John Gallo. Thank you all. And I'd like to jump right into this with a quick 5-minute presentation I whipped together earlier today. There are so many things I just love about this plan. I say kudos to you guys for so many fantastic things. I feel like this is great. That's going to be really wonderful for the community. I feel like there's just a few things that need some fine-tuning that are really important. And I think that we need to move the condominium hotel back and to allow for a viable wildlife corridor from the Pudding Creek watershed down to the whole forest across from Starbucks and Rite Aid. This is a corridor to somewhere. I think it's not appropriate to consider just buffering this development. I think also this provides breathing room for the people that are walking the trails there, and also allows for coastal retreat, because with sea level rise and global warming accelerating, things are going to start really ramping up. So moving that back and also moving the other pinch point back at the other end up by the depot, moving that back so that it's at the same distance from the coast as the parking lot. Because for wildlife corridors to be effective, they need to be inviting to get that gene flow for the different genotypes. And so if there's a pinch point at the very beginning, the animals will come out of Pudding Creek watershed, get to that point, and then turn around. Similarly, the tracks themselves, while it's true that tracks are actually great for wildlife corridors in a lot of contexts, those are more landscape contexts. In this case, the tracks themselves will provide detriment to prey and make them easy picking for predators. And so those should be moved back, and this will also allow for good breathing space for people that are walking along, and then also viability of the tracks as sea level rises. So hopefully those are small in the overall scheme of things, and I want to say that this area is fantastic to see the Phase 2 plan, and so I want to piggyback on the public comment that several of us made earlier this week about the idea of reserving some of the decisions for the future. I think that this is a perfect example of an area that should either be open space or at least reserved for the future, to allow for this vision to happen and keep our options open. And also something that Councilmember Peters mentioned a couple years ago, which I think is a fantastic idea, is to have a real small ball field here on the north side of town. My kids went through Little League here, and the T-ballers and farm players don't have any field to play on. We have to, there's no dirt infield, and so you get twisted ankles, and it just really turns a lot of people off. And it's really important to get kids outside, away from the Nintendos or whatever the new video games are called. And then also I feel like it's really important to throw in here that the construction job companies themselves, we should make an effort to, I don't know the full legal requirements, but either require that it's local construction job companies that are hired or incentivize it, because otherwise it's just really easy to hire a super mega construction firm where you only have to deal with one person and they've got hundreds of people underneath them, and all that money gets siphoned out of our community. Remember, a lot of this is about jobs. And so I think that there's, just to help brainstorm, while I was at it, I had some ideas, so I'll just share these. I think that there's several different options on how to make the moving of the hotel back viable. My preference is obviously to leave it in the hands of the professionals, the architects that the Hearts have hired. That's a very great presentation. But just to throw these ideas on the table, one is to move the hotel back, to move that higher density housing north, and move the medium density housing north one more. And another is to move part of the higher density moving back into where part of the parking lot is and make it a multi-story parking garage, which also has many other benefits as well. And then third, I hadn't heard about the brewery plan when I made up this idea, but one is to move both portions of the housing back, to have parking on the ground floor. So in conclusion, I'd like to say that we have the opportunity to have some amazing wildlife out there, some amazing animals living in a viable ecosystem. But this town has many, many houses. Getting 292 units and keeping a healthy ecosystem is so much better than getting 310 new units and losing our ecological integrity. And so I think, and even better yet, we can dare to dream and keep all the units and have a second level within Dry Shed 4 with parking on the ground floor. So thank you all very much for the time and the attention, and thank you all for the wonderful proposal. Thank you. Thank you.
I have a card for Shelley. Is it Cohen or Cohen? Please come up.
Thank you. I'm a resident here in the Fort Bragg area.
Hold the mic down to your own. Thank you.
I'm a resident here in the Fort Bragg area. I'm a former resident of both Sun Valley, Idaho and Hawaii, both tourist-based economies. My concern for this community is that we're no longer surviving on the lumber economy, we're no longer surviving on the fishing industry, and we are now moving towards a tourist-based economy. In my experience, from what I can see here, this is a prime market for this community. We have tens of thousands of people that can come here on a Friday afternoon's drive and bring their children to see natural ocean. They don't have that. I grew up in LA under the flight path. This is a resource that cannot be dispensed with lightly. We definitely need access for tourism. However, it needs to be considered within a big picture. There's nowhere to park tourist cars in this town when they go to town. But there's vacant property in town that could be purchased for parking garage, thereby facilitating a citywide and countywide bus transportation system for staff, for the businesses here, and also for the tourists. What happens on this land will happen for perpetuity. You won't be changed. This open, accessible oceanfront property is not the place to build private homes. It's a place to make the gift of access to nature for future generations accessible. When I lived in Hawaii, I developed a program of nature ethics, environmental education. I ended up serving 20,000 people a year through that program. People came from all over the world. We can do that here very easily. In Sun Valley, Idaho, it was laid out very much like this, one highway, 3 communities on it. At the top end was the resort community, the next were residential communities. People took the bus to work. Children could go up from school and ski on a Friday. High school students took biology classes in that environment. People come from all over the world and drop their money there at $100 a day to experience that once in their lifetime. People will come here for that same reason. We need to prioritize our environment as our source of income and employment. In Sun Valley, Idaho, for many, many years, they had a tradition of having an outdoor symphony. It was world class. People from all over the world applied just to play in the symphony. It was under white tents on the lawn for years and years and years. When people decided they wanted a facility upgrade, people contributed $43 million to build a state-of-the-art outdoor travertine amphitheater. It can happen. But it has to be made with conscious choices. And lastly, oceanfront property is not the place you put industry. In a town that is short on water, you don't put a brewery there. It doesn't work for the brewery because they have to pay to haul their things all over where they're distributed from. It would be much, I would think, it would be much more profitable for them to relocate closer to transportation, perhaps in areas that have been burned out, they're looking for new employment, and that have water. This land could partially be donated as open space and have environmental education there. It would be a tax benefit to those that do it. There could be state-of-the-art housing models there for people to learn and come take back to their communities, such like Danco produced for the senior housing. So I guess my overall request is that you think of the bigger picture and the long term. Whatever is done here has to address current employment. It also has to address the fact that there are no other places like this available for the access and education and enjoyment of hundreds of thousands of people.
Hi, Rex Crescent, members of the City Council. Will, I'd like to say a few words to Will. President Trump failed to erect his wall, but Will has succeeded in putting the wall around himself as Mary refuses to talk to the press, so I like to say a friendly word when I get a chance. The basic problem that I have with the afternoon's discussion is not really a deep-seated problem. I think we need to hear what the skunk train proposes, and I think that this is a very good opportunity in the harvest market. But it kind of strikes a lot of people, or strikes me as putting the cart before the horse. We have a city council that's tweaking the plans of a corporation and deciding their zoning, making their zoning decisions largely on that basis. And this is a, you know, I'm not saying that it's an outrageous thing to do. You should listen to developers and to people in the community before you make zoning plans. But to use their determinations and their plans as the basis for your zoning leaves out one big player in this discussion, which is the people of the city. And of course, people are going to say, wow, we had 65 meetings. Yes, we had 65 meetings. We had a development director that skewed the results of surveys, totally blindsided the planning commission with propaganda, and generally manipulated the process so outrageously that now she's fired. And so I would say, for example, that in the last go-around of the LCP, when they took Marie Jones's map up to the Coastal Commission and presented it to that body, that the Coastal Commission decided that the 70% of development that Marie proposed and the 30% open space would be reversed, and that 30% of the property could be developed and 70% of the property had to be left open space. That 70% will be retained by Georgia Pacific. They will not clean it up. Anybody that thinks they will has a much, maybe they know something about GP that I don't know, but based on the last 20 years of experience, I can pretty well assure you that the 70% of the mill site that GP is required to leave open space has no plan for development. And we got into that situation. That's an irrational situation. We're going to do all this development. We're going to leave 70% of it a strewn wasteland of concrete and rubble owned by a corporation out of Atlanta. That doesn't make a lot of sense. And the way that we got into that situation was by exactly the same kind of planning that we're doing here, where we do not do zoning in a way that asserts the prerogatives of the city to make the decisions, but instead of that, we allow developers to come in, and then the zoning process tails behind them like the tail of the dog. And, that's the basis for my, I also would like to agree, although I think we should certainly make provision for the brewery, our largest employer. I'm not so sure we should send them to a burn zone. But I think that the most important thing is that we take a walk around our region. I did this yesterday. I went down to Hare Creek, I went up Pudding Creek, I walked around the parameters of the mill site, I walked down the coastal trail. And the previous speaker was right. I'm not about tourism. I don't like tourists. I like them when the tourists go away. But I think that we live here in a place of incomparable beauty. There is nowhere else like it on earth. It's a treasure that we have it within our power to screw up. And this is doing that. And if the people of the city were asked what they wanted to be done with the mill site, it would not include high-density housing. It would not include a new extension of the railroad train out along the bluffs. It would not include having 70% of the mill site left in a state of industrial rubble. And I do not believe, and it has been some time since I have believed, that the city council will take proactive action on these, I'm being redundant, but the city council won't do that much about it. They will continue to trail along in the wake of the developers and do pretty much what the developers and the money says that they should do. But I do not believe that the people of the city are mute. I do not believe that our power as an electorate has been dissolved by the subterfuges of a development director now fired because of her ineptitude, and a city council that refuses to act proactively and make the choices that they need to make regardless of what the developers want. So we're going to have to see where this process leads us. Thank you very much.
My name is Chuck Whitlock. I've been a resident here for about 50 years now. Look around, I know most of you, or a great many of you. Firstly, I want to thank the sculpturing because I think they did a great presentation. And it's a great start for what we're going to do out there. It's not the end product by any means, but it's given us something to look at, something to ponder, and something to build on. Some of these elements will be removed, other elements will be added. And so I want to thank them for that. But one of the questions I have, based on the presentation, is what are the plans for the current railroad property? Where the tracks are now,
in terms of the skunk train, the depot, and the current engine house. And that's what I'd like to have some answers to. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Please come up.
Hello, my name is George Reinhardt, and it's good to once again have an opportunity to speak in front of a joint meeting here about the planning for the mill site. I really appreciate that. I have a few comments, but they'll be quick. I'm going to write further comments, and I will be CCing the Coastal Commission and the State Department of Toxic Substance Control, as well as submitting them to the city, and I encourage everybody who's listening to this to do the same. I wonder if people are aware of what happened outside this building yesterday at 1 a.m. I know Will is, and I know Jessica was there, and Tess was there. I'm not sure how many of you saw it. But the youth climate strike is very indicative, I think, of where many in our community are coming from. And I really don't think that this proposal, as wonderful as it is in some respects, because it represents a lot of work, and I do see it as a sincere effort from a certain point of view, I don't think it captures where I and many people are hoping our community will go. Many of us are calling for a restoration-led vision of development. Now, what restoration leading means is not no development. It means we really think about the whole plan, as some people have mentioned first. And so what I am saying is not quite the Valentine that was written by my close colleague John Gallo, because he showed pictures of housing and development and all this stuff and put a little heart around it. That was a little bit not where I'm coming from, but we're working in a consortium, which is the idea that we will all be working together to solve these issues. And I very much respect and appreciate that this is a first draft. This is not the end of the story. And the same thing is true for the Honer's suggestion. Transportation, I appreciate they said that we're going to try to keep cars out of sight. Cars, fossil fuel cars will be out of sight by the time we get around to building this site. Remember, we're moving into a climate-aware world, regardless of some of the leadership that's happening in Washington. We're the only developed country that's so backwards. You have to think about transportation. The bus system mentioned, I think, is a terrific idea. This was a great housing lecture, but is housing really where we want to be out there? Some of it is perhaps a good idea. But this whole idea that this map, or their work, is built from a map that our community agreed upon is not correct. This was a map that was very much underway. It was being changed every time we would come to a meeting. It was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And a lot of us were saying, oh wait, it should be getting smaller and smaller and smaller in terms of development footprint. So, we need a lot more space around that hotel. It has to be pushed back. I don't know what kind of research they're doing about financial viability, but hotel condo ownership models have totally failed. That's why radio and television are full of ads of people suing condo ownership entities. It's all over the place. It's a failed model. I would not recommend that. So where is the concern that I know is reflected in our community about sustainability, about climate change and sea level rise? I know that members of this group, so I'm not saying you guys aren't thinking about it, but I'm saying bring that critique that you have already talked about to this question of cutting trees right away or developing as much out there as is being proposed by people today. So I would like to see an overlay map of the DTSC land use covenants and deed restrictions on the map that we've just seen from the skunk train. Because I know, I was told this by people at DTSC, that perhaps 30% or something of the area out there cannot be used for residential. It's deed restricted and there are land use covenants. So we need to see an overlay map. That would be a very useful thing. Now, when we bring up a meeting space for our community, which I very much support, I agree with some of the members from the dais and from the community community who have spoken in favor of that. The skunk train very understandably said, if somebody wants to pay for this, we are receptive. Well, sure. But, you know, I think a conversation that I am very frustrated that this many months after the purchase I haven't heard. We need transparency in this process. Our community will thrive with transparency. We have a lot of intelligent people who will respond well to that. I'd like to know how much the skunk train paid for that property. So if you're making proposals that other people should be paying for stuff, or you're being questioned, I think, understandably, what about the existing train? What about that tunnel? What about all the economics of all this? I think a good starting point would be for our community to know what the skunk train paid for the property. Thank you very much. I'm over.
Hello again, Leslie Kashiwada. So I'm intrigued with the proposal from the skunk train. It's good to see where their thinking is. I'm in agreement with trying to keep cars less visible and trying to have more public options for electric trams, you know, just less cars, period. And yet we're talking about building something that would, a hotel, a conference area that would bring a lot of tourists, and that's a lot of travel, that's a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. I think the main thing that struck me was the map that's not up there anymore, which shows where the wildlife corridor is in relation to the trail, the city-owned property to the west, and then the development that's to the east. And there are definitely pinch points. I'm particularly concerned at the northern end because there's a planned Pomo Village, which I think is a fantastic idea. I'm not excited about where they've sited it. And the train comes in. That's right in the wildlife corridor. So and I'm not necessarily in agreement that train tracks are compatible with the wildlife corridor. It is true that many of these animals will move in the evening, the early evening and early morning, and some in the middle of the night. But there's wildlife out there in the daytime as well, and putting a train track right in the middle of the wildlife corridor would completely change the character of that. I think the wildlife corridor from the maps I saw previously was 100 feet, which is, I think, what you asked them to do. I don't think it's 150, I don't think it's 200. I think 200 is more appropriate, especially with the proposed cottages that are going almost right out to the wildlife corridor. I think it's important to really take a look at that. I met with Bruce Barnett, their environmental consultant, and he did express his concern about the maze of fences that are to the south, like this is a wildlife corridor to nowhere. But that's because he's not from the area and he's not familiar with all of the proposals that we've had for restoring those wetland areas. I mean, yes, I agree. I told him as it stands now, it's not viable. It needs to change. Those fences need to be down. The beach berm is going to come down. Pond 8 is going to disappear. We need to plan for that. I think that's a benefit actually to the property owners to the north to have that cleaned up. And I understand some of the legalities that say, well, you don't need to clean it up unless you're going to put houses on top of it. But I think we need to find a different kind of legal model that says it needs to be cleaned up, period, because you put it there, you need to take it away or fix it in some way. So there's the pinch point at the north. I don't even call it a pinch point, I call it a dam. It really is a total blockade of the movement north to Pudding Creek. And then the way in which the cottages come out towards the coast on the south west side. Both of those pinch points, I think, can be problematical, as would be any development that would go south of Redwood, and that hasn't been decided yet. because nobody's bought that property, and I think there's some zoning issues there. So otherwise, I like the amount of open space that they showed, but people will go out there, they will walk around, they will interact with, try to feed the birds or the ground squirrels. The housing element, another issue there will be all of the domestic pets, all the cats and the dogs that we brought into the area that will come right out onto that site as well. And so I agree that the railroad tracks might actually be kind of a fence that will catch prey, small mammals and birds for the domestic pets to get. So those are all things to consider. But it's really great to see some life given to these flat zoning maps. I'll say again, the map is not the territory. And to really look at those and feel what it might be like to be out there with that development. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to call for a 10-minute break, please. Reconvene the joint meeting of the City Council Planning Commission of the City of Fort Bragg. Welcome back, everybody. I know we're getting into lunchtime, but I think that we should be winding up soon. We are at the portion of public comment, questions on the Skunk Train presentation. Anyone else like to? Yes. Oh, thank you. Mr. Vaughn. Mr. Vaughn, would you like to come up? Thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Terrence Vaughn. I live in Fort Bragg. Some things I'd like to bring up regarding the hotel construction is there's more than tourism that happens in this community. It's recreation. So what I'd like to see, we talked to them about is, or to you guys about, is places to wash off bicycles so we don't transmit sudden oak death syndrome in and out of our forest and bring it up to here. Showers for abalone divers and surfers that they will clean themselves off before they go in the rooms. Benches outside of them so they don't go in your rooms with cleats and nasty wetsuit clothes. That you do accommodate the recreation of this industry. One of the concerns I also have is access from this property to the coastal trail, which is closed after night, after dark. Is that going to be open then 24/7, or is that going to be closed, but access through the hotel will be open, or what is the plans for time and access on that coastal trail? Right now there's a fence that goes between the coastal trail and this property. Will that fence be taken down, or will there be corridors in which the public can access through that? So there is a security issue around that. As otherwise, effectively, we've just given away our access to a private corporation to our coast. If our public can't access it 24/7, but the organization can't. So access is an issue. Just wanted to bring it up that it is brought up and talked about. Other than that, I think it's a relatively nice plan, but really it doesn't integrate at all to our existing architectural designs. Craftsman looking buildings would really look good. Wouldn't be hard to build them that way. So, a little bit of input. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Hi, and I know I'm Amy Winwood, Coastal Planning Biology, public comment. I am kind of on call for these guys, this team, whom I love as a land use consultant, but mostly they're big kind of perfecting this just fine on their own. From my perspective, I have some positive feedback I'd like to give through the public comment. I'm excited, it's a little confusing. Sorry, I gotta do this. It's bifocal. I need this back. Let me see. Here. Sorry, I'm using up all my time just trying to say this crap. So, as you know, we do, as land use consultants, we do work up and down the coast. And we are blessed, as you know, with a great many public access spots all up and down the coast. From as and one quasi, anyways, it's everywhere. The mill site is infill development. There's opportunity for making stuff look really great. I think that the work that Burton Miller and his team have done with the input with the Skunk team is pretty fantastic. I would love to see development happen here on the mill site as opposed to the increased development pressure out in the county. So considering the big picture, that would be helpful. I definitely love the idea of small unit high density as a potential new zoning type on the mill site as well as specific other places in the city. I think that the siting of that at the north end of town, north end of the site, kind of sandwiches in well between the light industrial of those storage units and the parking of Glass Beach. Exact refinements of boundaries of everything relative to comments that other people have made, for discussion possibly, but I think it all works really gracefully. I think the circulation it really balances quite nicely the need for some level of private vehicular access and their guests onto the property, onto the residential properties, getting people into the visitor serving and commercial and live work hostel area, the historic site. I think all of that circulation, and the more I looked at it, I was like, wow, this is really, really graceful. You've got a balance of protecting some areas from intrusion in some spots and then opening it up to the public in other spots. Views from the coastal trail, as many people here, I walk the northern part of the coastal trail quite often, and I'm obsessed about where the development might be and where the views are, and I actually think the current plan, as you're walking north on the coastal trail, does kind of tuck back in along what your current view corridor is towards what I might start to think of as something nice to look at, which would be kind of like the Glass Beach housing and north. But this plan kind of fills in that space where you would be looking at, I love looking at the Holmes Lumber. It would be more blocking my view of Holmes Lumber and then the Rossi storage and, and that. The wildlife corridor, I think a lot of that, there's that huge open space in the middle. I don't know professionally how wildlife interacts with rails, but I would tend to defer to wildlife specialists for that, and it seems like we've heard from one about that. My question as a land use consultant, my question as a land use consultant is timing of applications. Can someone submit an application? When can somebody predictably, as a property owner out here, spend their money on developing these thoughts? Things keep changing regularly, policies and goals keep changing. If we want to see housing as soon as possible, then some stuff's going to have to stop moving around so people can put their money down on design and implementation and utilities, and then maybe hit the ground running with an application when the LCP is certified. Otherwise, you're going to wait. I'm conservative. I would tell people to wait until the LCP is certified before spending your money and redrawing all the time. I was at that first meeting with the Pomo band. It was so exciting. It was really fantastic. And I just really applaud what this crew is doing in outreach with all these different experts, with the tribes, with the community members, with the council members, and I think this is quite a graceful resolution. I look forward for land use zoning proposal. Looking forward to see how things shake out once we get into specifics. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Andrew Jordan. I've lived in Fort Bragg since 2015, and I just have some notes here that I just want to present to the City Council and the Committee for consideration. If there are established wildlife corridors, I think they should be preserved to the extent that they should be, but the perfect should not be the enemy of the good. I do like the open space, and I checked with one of the presenters from the skunk training that is available to the public. One of the virtues of economic development is that the mill site will be cleaned up in that area, which I think is a good thing to keep in mind, because there seems to be a propensity to criticize without keeping in mind the virtues and the advantages that would be achieved. And I think you have to keep both in mind at the same time. Because you're balancing economic interests versus ecological interests. And to that extent, if there is kind of an ongoing development with respect to expandable developments, and not everything is done at once, some construction is done, we see how that goes, a little bit more is done, we see how that goes, but then trying to maintain a balance of all the interests involved is a very difficult thing to do, but seems to be the best approach at this point. As far as the presentation from the skunk train goes, at some point, it may be possible to have virtual reality presentations, and people will have much more than a schematic understanding of what a development would be. You could actually walk through it, fly through it, look at it. You could see all of the levels of development, from infrastructure of sewage, water, power, internet as an information utility, and the like. That day hasn't come yet, but hopefully Fort Bragg will have fiber optic bandwidth on the level of like 1 gigabit, 10 gigabit, whatever the bandwidth can be achieved. And that would be a real advantage to our community and would be a real asset as far as a non-extractive resource. It would always be there as long as it's maintained. With regards to questions of authority and whether or not there's malfeasance as far as authority goes, our community and society basically wants the most competent people to be involved in the decision making. And even though there is a risk of corruption or malfeasance, that doesn't mean that there is a certainty of corruption and malfeasance. We should always be aware of that, but that doesn't mean that anybody who has authority is automatically a bad person. Going back to the status quo ante is an interesting concept, because the character of the architectural and cultural community here at Fort Bragg is one of diversity at many levels. And so when somebody talks about the character of something or another, it really leaves open a very subjective standard as far as what that character is. And as far as standards go, I think it's very important that the City Council and any other decision-making body don't move the goalposts. The skunk train took a lot of time and probably significant funds to establish this report, and if they have to change that in light of changing circumstances, it becomes very difficult to allocate risk and to make good decisions with regards to what the guidelines are, as far as what is required by the City Council or any other authority. And lastly, I don't know who controls what as far as this goes. There seems to be a lot of opinion with regards to what other people should do with their property without those people actually putting any skin in the game. So it would be very helpful for me to know what role and what power and authority the City Council has, the Coastal Commission has, and this committee has with regards to making decisions as far as the development and use at the mill site. Thank you very much.
Anyone else? All right, well, we'll get back to council and commission for any follow-up comments, questions, and then we'll allow Arts and Mr. Finley if you want to respond to any comments or concerns from the public or questions.
Well, I just wanted to comment on Mr. Jordan's question about who has what power in this process. I don't have the answer for you right now. That's a pretty complicated one. I don't know who wants to approach that. But I do want to say that it resonates with me just because so much of this conversation is about who and how to exert control to ensure the best outcome here. And I think that's where we get into a lot of push and pull. A lot of the conversations today kind of center around that question, I think.
I do think we're going to have to review the circulation element quite thoroughly, and it may affect the outcome of how this develops. I think it's a critical issue.
And we're concerning ourselves with zoning right now, so we're not really in the authority to say what pretty much can go out there, except that what's already in our building code, our design standards and our regular books, that's where we have the authority. And so I think that, they would have to comply with a lot of the coastal building design codes that we already have in the books. And so I think that that's our role here. And to engage the public in this process as much as we have in the last many years. So I think that maybe that answers some concern what authority we do have. Anyone else?
I got a question for the
Okay.
applicant or the presenters. The high density, small unit concept that's being presented, is there a lot size that you kind of have in your head what that might be? And, because I like the idea of affordable housing, but also housing that's affordable. And I think this is an interesting thing to kind of pursue. So I just would kind of get your feedback on what that would mean as far as like lot size and those type of details for this type of zoning.
Would you like to? Yeah. And if you want to address any concerns, feel free.
Yeah, for the zoning in the 12 to 15 units per acre, starting with that. You can achieve those densities with small, single-family lots, 3,000 to 5,000 square feet. When you get into small unit, higher density, then you're tending to build what you might call a multi-family building. So these would be likely condominiums in a common structure with an internal corridor, because the units would be, again, at the most affordable end of the small spectrum. They would range from 450, 550 square feet to 650, 850 square feet. So, they'd be double loaded corridor, stacked, on 2 levels. So not sold as a lot, sold as a condominium.
Do you want to address any other?
Sure. Would you like us to, there were a number of questions that were raised by the members of the public, and I thought it would be really nice if we got a chance to go through them.
Yes.
They've consolidated those questions, but one thing I'd like to say really at the outset, we have the great fortune of being in an absolutely beautiful place, probably one of the most beautiful places in California. And the problem is that people want to see it. They want to see the ocean. It's a human thing. You just want to see it. And so the problem is, it's like there's this ratio, and that is the further you go back from the bluffs, the less you can see. It sort of just becomes the hazy background as you go further back. And so the reason for the hotel, we keep trying to get forward, is so that people would be able to see the ocean, be able to see the coast, be able to see the lowlands and things like that from it. Now, there's a trade-off, and that is that we have on one hand, the city is a cap of 35 feet, which we respect in all of our planning. But there's also this push to try and push the hotel back. Well, the further you push it back, even at 35 feet, you won't see very much. So if the building got taller, it could go further back and still be able to accommodate people being able to see the ocean. So that's the only point, is that it's not that we're trying to sprawl the hotel all over the place. It's the fact that it's set back so far and it can't be very tall. So that's just in general the explanation. So why don't we go through the questions? You want to just start telling me the questions I have?
As far as the occupancy. The occupancy of the hotel. I can do that. So one question was about the occupancy of the hotel. Right now, we don't have a working number. The study is still in progress. We certainly ran a lot of different pro formas and numbers, but we don't have a working occupancy number. Next, there are ways where you can also limit local ownership. There are some people who have done things where the first time it goes out for ownership, you can do a lottery system. There's other models like that you can try if you want to make sure it's people who own it locally. It's complex, and whatever future development partners we have will probably have an opinion on that, but that is certainly ways that people have done that. There was talk about education. I just want to mention one alternative vision for the hostel that we've looked at is, especially at certain times of year, is I would love to turn it into a place also for school groups. I have this idea I've been working on where they could show up for 2 nights, spend time, ride the train to the Redwoods, spend time at Glass Beach, go to the Noyo Aquatic Center, spend time at our historic center. I think it would be a dynamite thing for school kids to come up here and spend several days. So that's something we're working on. Again, it's early in the phases. Regarding the DTSC, I forget who mentioned that about the requirement. I think George mentioned that about the. So we have been talking to the DTSC about the toxics from the property. On our property, it's really limited to just the Railroad Square is the only place where it exists. And the limitations that apply to us is that we shouldn't have daycare, schools, and some similar things like that. And we have spoken with the DTSC and clarified that you can put in whatever zoning you want, but then we can then apply the requirements necessary to meet the DTSC requirement. So you could zone it commercial, you could zone it open space, you could zone it whatever you want, but then we just have the restrictions added to that. So there's no limits on what type of zoning goes in there. But geographically, it's all in the Railroad Square area. As far as just the comment a moment ago about access from the hotel to the coastal trail, if you guys want to close the gates at a certain time, that's fine. I mean, that's I don't think an issue for us. We respect that if you don't want people out there at night. I think that's all I have, Robert.
There was a comment by Chuck LeBach regarding the engine house, the depot, and the existing tracks. The engine house is going to be restored. We did make in the 2019 build grant application to the Department of Transportation a request for assistance in the restoration of that building. The current depot isn't going anywhere. At least that's not our intention. So the current depot will continue to function in a visitor serving capacity, and the addition of the Glass Beach depot to the north is in addition to what we have presently. With respect to the tracks that are out here, there certainly may be some tracks in time that disappear just because of them not being needed, but we don't plan on dramatically changing the layout.
Further questions? There was a question about the wildlife corridor, about the constraints. I think one of the biggest constraints that we really have is on the very north end, we have a horizontal city parking lot that runs all the way out. That is the tightest constraint when they were looking at it. As far as at the top, there's a city parking lot. At the south end of us, there's the city fenced path going out that constrains it on the other end. And then there's obviously the sewer reclamation facility and everything else, which is the other constraint. From our perspective, we actually have the least constrained portion of the entire property. It's not to say if there's a biologist comes back and says there's something important we need to address, we will. But I think just simply throwing an arbitrary number out there really isn't helpful. It really is trying to make sure that it's consistent with the rest of the pathway, starting with the city's own constraints. That's what we should start with.
Yeah, I can just fill in a little bit on a couple of issues. First, the meeting space, and there's always a distinction between demand and willingness to pay. And some of the feedback we got is a lot of the meeting space demand was asking that the operators offer the space for community use at no charge. In order to make it economically viable, it's like occupancy for rooms. There just needs to be enough sort of business to sort of support it. That said, there's another opportunity here, I think, and Mike respond. In considering the future of the dry shed, the brewery is one option. I discovered quite a number of warehouses that have been repurposed, many of them for breweries. They tend to be open in plan and frequently used for larger scale gatherings. Some are even structured in a way that they can set up some shallow tiered seating. So depending on the prospects for the dry shed, there's certainly ample volume there to consider, if appropriate, structuring that in a way that has a prime tenant or a mix of tenants and a multi-purpose function that could address in some measure the need for surge meeting space on those few occasions where you've got a much higher demand and a much greater number of people. So as far as the meeting space in the hotel, it's going to be pro forma, I think, driven based on intelligence gathered studying the competitive set, all the other properties in the region and what the demand is. So we're completely open to whatever works. The other thing I wanted to comment on was the condominium hotel. I think a few of the comments may have been mixing condominium hotel with timeshare. Timeshare, as most of you know, is individuals buy a week or 2 weeks a year. It's not really a condominium. We've done a couple of properties that are condominium hotels that are very successful. One, the Westin Avon at Beaver Creek. I'm told it's the highest performing Westin in the chain. You wouldn't know it, but every room was sold as a condominium. They're all in the rental pool. Some of the larger units, an owner can opt out. As I mentioned, the interiors are managed by the hotel, services, consistent look. It's just a hotel where the suites happen to be owned by investors or individuals that may want to use it a certain number of days or weeks per year. The way they're usually organized is you buy, let's say, a 2-bedroom cottage or suite. One of the bedrooms is a lock-off, which means it can be sold independently of the 1 bedroom. So it can be counted as 1 key, or 2 keys. There are other clever ways that operators integrate that concept into the operation of a hotel. We've also done those cottages at the Del Coronado fractional ownership, where instead of selling each unit as a condominium, you sell fractional shares, quarter shares, third shares. And in order to keep that unit viable as a part of the hotel operation, you limit the number of days per year each fractional owner can actually use or occupy the room. So it's a way of providing, I would say, a higher level of accommodation. You have more units that are larger. You sell them at a competitive rate. It's still a hotel. It's not entirely privatized, and it's just a completely different economic model that makes the property work because you've got revenue up front. I think that's what's anticipated.
Just keep in mind, when we came into this, we only wanted to do three things. We wanted to set up Redwood Square to be an enhancement to our existing operation. We wanted to get the public out there to be able to see the ocean on a railroad extension. We wanted to reach Glass Beach if that was possible, to try and tie in that other great attraction here in Fort Bragg. All this other stuff was delivered to us by staff, and we found out we bought the property. It's like, okay, you're going to build 600 to 800 residential units in a 250 unit hotel. It was like, whoa, what? That was not our plan. So we've come into this with the guidance that the hotel should be 250 rooms. So we've gone through the analysis. We've had an outside firm do the economics, coming back to us and saying, I think the largest hotel on the coast is 80 rooms. So this is huge, what we are being asked to take a look at. We've come back, we've looked at it, and realized by taking this condo hotel idea, we could create that kind of feature here for Fort Bragg. Not quite that big, not quite that the way it was originally envisioned, but still something that would be a real magnet for people coming to Fort Bragg. And also with that community space, we're going to build as much as we can, and much can be economically supported. Were there other questions that we kind of missed or something like that from staff or anybody here that we didn't cover? Please. Oh, I love that. Okay, yes. The question was, what's an update on the tunnel? You want to do it? Come on, talk to him. He's proud. This is taking some work.
So an update on the tunnel. In 2015, as everybody knows, there was not necessarily an additional cave-in. Rather, the contractor, so let me back up. 2013, we had a natural cave-in. We were doing work to modernize the tunnel. We reopened the tunnel the same year. We continued moving west in our modernization efforts, which was to remove the original timber sets and apply a more modern-day approach to building the tunnel, and that is using shotcrete soil nails and the such. Very similar to what you would see when they build a retaining wall on the hillside, where they're actually stabilizing the whole hillside. We were moving west, and because of contractor negligence, he triggered a landslide on the exterior, so the west face of the hillside. That is what we've been working on. We've not been working on the tunnel because we had to stabilize the hillside prior to being able to put service back through the tunnel. So in 2016, we began efforts to, understand where historic scarps and landslide movement had taken place. We finished that work in 16 and in 17 during the appropriate construction season. We were able to go in and rebuild the hillside above tunnel number 1 on the west face. And rather than putting it back up in a sloped fashion, it looks like a mini version of Machu Picchu in that we put terraces on the hillside to increase the stability and to ensure that it wouldn't come down, but also to accommodate proper drainage for the significant amount of rainfall that comes down at the Glen Blair area. The construction concluded in 17 and 18. Winter weather season. The first winter that it underwent was 17-18. We did achieve 95% compaction rates with the earth that we put back in place. We did install proper drainage so that the slopes are actually sloped back into the hillside with proper drains running to the back of those slopes and then down the face of the hillside. The past winter that we just came out of, 18-19, was the second winter. So from an engineering standpoint, the engineers would like to let us see that continue on for maybe another winter or more before they're comfortable with us putting service back into the tunnel. And so that's what we're waiting for right now. We are, it's not if service will be, it's when, and that we're on that track right now.
Yeah, there was mention, well, you were talking about the Glass Beach, and the emphasis on that section. Do you have any concerns about the dwindling impact of our actual Glass Beach as far as the glass being gone and, ocean rides and all that, or sea rides?
As you may know, our other company is Sierra Energy, which takes waste to clean energy. We're targeting 13 billion tons of greenhouse gas a year being taken out. The other thing that we do is we work with a lot of recyclers. And the thought has occurred to us, a few hundred tons of cullet, which is crushed glass, would do really well out there. But there actually is a process where you can take crushed glass and run it through a cement mixer, and you make sea glass by doing that. The problem is that I've stood out there and watched just whole groups of people just scooping up all the glass, sticking in jars and bags, and they walk away with it. Our glass beach is turning into, well, just a beach. So one of the thoughts that we've talked about is actually at our station there of bringing a few hundred tons of cullet, actually crushing it, mixing it with sand and such, and actually having a big area where kids can actually find sea glass with an occasional piece of pirate gold or something thrown in there for fun. But the idea is that you can't stop people from taking what's out there. They're going to keep doing it unless we put a cop out there to stop them. I don't think we're going to be allowed to throw a bunch of glass out in the ocean and let it come back naturally, because I think there's probably a law against that. So our thought was at the Glass Beach Station was to at least create a place where sea glass can at least be brought in easily and people can actually, they can collect it, because it does look the same. You can put some of the rarer colors in there, the blues and the reds and things like that. You can crush some of that and throw it in. So people can come home with a bit of sea glass. And we may also encourage people, if they take a bag, to go dump it on the beach.
I have two comments. One is, I was curious about your plan to use the I don't know, you call it turntable or whatever, to move the things out. What is the plan for, is this going to be part of your regular 2 times a day skunk train excursion? Or is this going to be a tourist train that goes back and forth, every hour? Or what is your plan for that?
Our current thinking is, right now, because of the tunnel collapse, we've been running a really short trip. I mean, really short trip, 3 miles. But the funny thing is, a lot of people really like it. It's short for families, for kids and such. Sometimes the 20-mile slog all the way to North Spur is a bit much. So we realized that a short trip is a good idea, and having that as an additional feature of actually doing this, running out to the Glen. But man, if we could add that extra mile of going out to Glass Beach so they can see the ocean, see the whales from the rails, that's a great thing. Then coming out to a turntable, turning the locomotive around, putting it back on the other end of the train and sending it back to the Glen. So the idea is it's an enhancement to the existing service we're already running, the service we already have.
Okay, my only comment about that is I think that's exciting. I used to live near the Sacramento Railroad Museum.
Yeah.
And we had the little train that went down to Fremont and back, the little town of Fremont, whatever that is. Not Fremont. Was it? Folsom.
Freeport.
Freeport.
Thank you. Not Fremont, that's much better. Anyway, and it used to go by our house. It was just a cute little thing, but it was only like once or twice on a Saturday. So it was a slight impact. I mean, we heard the train, blow its whistle. We had lots and lots of people screaming and yelling and being happy, and it was fun. But it is an impact. So it's something to think about with the number of trips back and forth on the coast when you do that. And all those people hoping to have nice ocean meditation time as they're walking along and sitting on the bench and contemplating the crashing waves. The second thing is, I don't know if I missed it somewhere in the report or maybe verbally somehow, that in my conversations with Mr. Pinoli and others, there was some talk about use of the dry sheds for a portable mill, some talk about a potential amphitheater, which was brought up by someone else, and I believe the portable mill as a tourist mill would be unbelievable, and there could be some other contracts with Jackson State Forest. Can you comment on that?
Yes. So as far as the other uses of dry shed, there's no deal finalized at this point. We are talking to people that have the potential of putting a mill in on one side, the south end of the dry shed. We've contemplated that use in addition to North Coast Brewing Company and believe they're compatible as far as uses. So that is, in a perfect world, that's what will happen. Obviously, there's a city process they have to go through, and the Coastal Commission feels they have a role here. So there's definitely a process that has to be followed there. As to the amphitheater, it's an idea that I think actually came from you. In one of the early meetings, there was a discussion about the need for an outdoor amphitheater, a place for people to actually have events. And so in our first draft, when we started working with North Coast, we talked about the idea of using the wall on the east side of Dry Shed, using as a wind block and a back screen, backstop, and then having performances, sort of a half-shell amphitheater facing that for outdoor performances and such. As you may know, the owners of North Coast are huge supporters of the arts. They put on concerts all the time, love the idea. And so the idea of working together, creating that kind of thing, that vibe on the Dry Shed, I think is something really popular here in the community. So yes, we very much want to do that.
And I'd like to plant a bug in your ear about indoor soccer.
All right, time to get on it. Thank you.
Any other questions from the council and commission? Our city manager has something to read and public comment.
Actually, I think the lawyers still want to do a presentation.
All right, so then, if there's nothing else, thank you all very much for this great presentation. We appreciate your hard work and look forward to seeing the product as it evolves. So thank you all so much.
Thank you all, very much appreciate it.
Can I ask one more question?
Of this?
Yeah.
Sure, come on over.
Sparks, what about sparks on the headlines with the train? You're gonna be having a spark chaser? But I mean, there's sparks that steel wheels create, so I'm curious about that along the headlines.
So sparks are generally created when you have cast iron brake shoes applying against the steel wheels. We no longer use cast iron brake shoes, we use composite material. So there's the spark issue really is minimal. Sparks also occur at high rates of speed. They can occur at slow rates of speed, but it's not likely. And I'm not going to say that it's impossible to happen, because anything is possible. The likelihood is slim to none. Certainly no sparks that come out of the locomotive. All of our locomotives have proper spark arresters on them. And the steam engine, which most people thinks, what comes out of the stack would cause fires, but the stack we actually burn pretty clear and colorless. Actually, the stack of the steam locomotive, if the fireman is paying attention, he can actually burn that stack cleaner than that of a diesel locomotive. There are no clinkers or material that come out of the stack because it is an oil-fired locomotive.
All right, thank you. Emilio Science Center. Mr. Turner, welcome back to the chamber. These seats are really comfortable. I appreciate you buying these.
Dave Turner with the Noyo Center Board, and I hope you're enjoying the comfortable seats. Our executive director, Sheila Stevens, asked me to come support her today, and then she ditched me. So, but we just wanted to take a minute to tell you where we're at, since we're one of the other property owners almost out of the mill site. So, we're right now working on a coastal development permit to move the container, because the wastewater treatment plant is doing some work, and we've got to move that container that's there, so we're gonna move out to the property, the back end, the eastern portion of the property, where it's pretty disturbed and where the city's actually got a permit to distribute the earth that's piled up there. There's dredge spoils and earth, so as they spread that out, we're gonna put the containers on some of that area that they've put that on. And then we decided, since we've got to come in and get a permit, we might as well get a permit for a 2,400 square foot building that we can house the whale bones in where the mice don't get to them, the mice in slightly bigger environments. So we'll be getting a permit for that, but it'll be on the kind of the far east back end of that Moya Center, 11 acres. The other thing I wanted to update is, we told you when last time we talked about the transfer that one of the conditions is we do some improvements out there, spend some money. And our architects that the community met with and the board met with and some of the city staff met with a few months ago are coming back next week to show us their current iteration of taking what the community and the board and the city has given them. So we're getting that, I wish it was last week so I could show those to you today, but we'll come back and show you those as they develop. They're exciting. We're looking at having a net zero, or even a positive energy creation when we build the big facility. We're talking about the whale house and the marine science center that will be not next year, not in 2 years, but maybe in 5 years, or for sure in 10. And lastly, just want to thank the city for working with transferring the property and also for considering, I know at that one meeting, you guys are looking at moving the zoning a little bit so we can work with that, because we have that wetland area. So as we come up with these plans, we'll come back and show you it, and smudging that line, trading the little space from one end of the center to the 11 acres to the other. But we appreciate everything you guys are supporting us with, and it's good things. The community, I'm sure most of you have been over to the new center here, right here on Main. It's doing fabulous. We're just blown away by all the kids coming through and the families and people. It's working great. Thanks for your support. Any questions?
A 2,500 square foot building, is that what you said?
Yeah, 2,400, because if it's under 2,500, we're hopeful that we can do less planning stuff.
And it's just going to be a warehouse?
It's going to be a warehouse for the bones, and where we pull the bones out, where we're working on the whale, mainly for the blue whale bones that we've got.
Thanks for all your work, we appreciate it.
All right, thanks for making good use of that.
Thank you. I have a public comment to read.
I do have public comment. Do you want public comment on?
Oh, certainly.
Oil Center's presentation?
Any public comment on the Noyo Science Center presentation? Seeing none?
So, Christine McGee actually bought where the Chamber of Commerce building is, and then the building just to the north of that. And so she's kind of the fourth property owner, and she is out of town and wasn't able to make this meeting, but she did send a public comment, and it is attached to the agenda, so it's available for you to review. But I also thought I'd just read it out loud so we had it in the record. Thank you for accepting my correspondence for the special meeting scheduled September 21st. My husband, Ralph McGee, and I love our home here on the coast. My husband's grandmother's family is original founder of Branscombe, Patricia Branscombe McGee, and the McGee family subdivided a good portion of Willits, owned a few sawmills, and has a deep history in the timber industry in Mendocino County. They also were once partial owners of the skunk train. So we are well vested in the area and appreciate the diversity our county and coast bring to all of us. My family is from Santa Cruz, California. I moved from there to Mendocino County back in 2000. However, I have been back and forth in this county since 1985. In addition to an accounting firm, I was the GM of a publicly traded division of Westinghouse Air Brake, now part of GE, for almost 10 years. We built locomotives, commuter cars, and cars for entities like Amtrak, New Jersey Transit, etc., and many international customers as well. I traveled all over the world to develop new business manufacturing sites and secure new business partners in foreign countries. I have been struggling. I've seen small town governments promise so much to business to establish their companies with great jobs in their towns or cities. But in the end, the supply chain and the demand of competitive cost control force a company to consolidate, relocate, or change to meet the demands of the consumer. Fort Bragg reminds me of the many small towns or companies that we considered to acquire. They were hungry for growth, but their location was their demise. Fort Bragg has this same challenge. We are also challenged by qualified professional staff. In turn, we hire staff in Santa Cruz to support our technical requirements in accounting and taxation. Our plan was to relocate qualified staff from Santa Cruz and also a business attorney. However, this does not support succession nor a proper growth plan and leaves our firm very vulnerable. Our daughter is an engineer and she lives in Los Angeles. She would love to live here, but the market does not support her or the cost of her education. Also, the area is not attractive to a young professional long term. I would like to see her move here and offer consulting contracts via the web someday. Potentially when she's older, she may have the appreciation for Fort Bragg. My company, K. McGee & Company, Inc., an accounting firm, has built a local presence and as well as a strong web-based presence. We serve two primary client bases, Mendocino and Santa Cruz County. It was our intention after acquiring our office from Georgia Pacific to grow the Fort Bragg office and serve the Santa Cruz clients from Fort Bragg. We have adopted a 90% paperless office, utilizing secure portals for clients, web-based accounting, and secure client files, all in the cloud. With all of the planning we did, it never occurred to us that in downtown Fort Bragg, true high-speed internet was not available. We did verify with Comcast and was told our site was green, which means service may be provided. It was incorrect, and this was learned after we acquired the property several months later by Comcast. They provided a quote for us to receive service for a total price of $88,000. I believe with the internet, I could overcome the distribution by way of web, and through development in Santa Cruz, successfully relocate qualified staff. But without the basic delivery of high-speed internet, it is not an option. Internet speed and reliability is mandatory and just as important as the power, telephone, and even qualified staff. Asking a small accounting firm to pay for the infrastructure to have the internet provided across the highway, and then they will market to the other business that acquire property is not reasonable. Just as the city of Fort Bragg must validate and develop road access and utilities, they must also make sure that our infrastructure includes business-ready internet. With an important part of our coast becoming accessible again, thanks to Georgia Pacific and the hard work by staff and city council members of Fort Bragg, we have an opportunity to carve out a development plan that will sustain our little town for many generations. I realize many want open space or no development. We have plenty of open space currently and have really no development that has dramatically impacted our growth base, both in income or tax revenue. So that has proven to be detrimental to all of us. We all want access to the ocean, and allowing residential development does not benefit or change the challenges we are faced with today, but rather only benefits a few future residents. We need viable businesses, and manufacturing is not an option based on our location. Cannabis, possibly, but eventually with the indoor grow, they too will evolve to move closer to their distribution channels to save costs. Mendocino will no longer offer a growing option when it can be done anywhere and legally, so we must be creative, and I strongly hope that you consider establishing a new downtown location that has a coastal vibe of music, art, and strong businesses coupled with multi-use buildings that allow smaller residential units upstairs. Create a space that everyone can breathe in the sound, air, and quality of our beautiful coast. Businesses can do this for Fort Bragg. We welcome all to our companies, share access, and our wonderful hosts to, as you will note in many communities like Los Gatos, Capitola, Monterey, Napa, South Lake Tahoe, etc. They all have their own color and sun, but we all agree they are all lovely places to visit, and many professional businesses are doing well in those locations. If we have the same development support infrastructure, we could be a destination not just to visit, but live a good quality life and have our children actually continue to live there. Business are allowing more employees to work from home because of the internet, and this is one area that you can support professional companies that leverage the internet to provide services. We provide quality pay, benefits, and bring new money into our area utilizing the outside world we access via the internet. We are currently looking at acquiring additional property, but after viewing the future zoning options, we are concerned and not sure if an investment is justified. We are currently engaged with GP representatives and will continue to explore. We look forward to reading the minutes and are hopeful as to where our current leadership will take us. I apologize for this long comment, however, if you would like to see how we utilize the internet to support our entire business, I extend an invitation to our office.
Thank you. We did visit that. Office has been completely renovated. I just want to point out that, we are going to adopt a dig once policy where when we dig up roads, we put in conduit for fiber optic. And it's my understanding it goes very close to our business, but not quite. And Assemblyman Jim Wood had a comment. Do you want to address what he said about, because of the Caltrans putting in a sidewalk along the western portion of the highway?
So Caltrans is in the process of putting in sidewalks on the western portion of Highway 1, and we had reached out to them this last week and to let them know that we would very much like them to put conduit in when they do that project. And the response was sort of mixed and asked us about where we were going to come up with the funding for that. And Assembly Member Wood made the point that there was a bill passed last year and that Caltrans actually has to put the conduit in and at their cost. So he was very supportive if we get additional pushback from Caltrans on that requirement.
That's very important. Assemblyman Jim Wood wrote the bill that got passed and signed by the governor. So he was a little surprised to hear us getting pushback that we were getting from Caltrans. So it was a good visit to have him here. So we thank him for his work for this community. Is there anything else? If there's nothing else, we'll adjourn. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the